Jack Tramiel leaves Commodore. Apple advertises the Mac. And Amstrad enters the home computer market. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the show where we travel back in time to find out what was making headlines in the home computer and video game industries of yesteryear. I'm your host, Carl, and I'm joined again by everybody's favorite co-host, Alex.
Happy to be here, Carl.
As always, you should be. So, before we turn on the time machine and head back 40 years to January of 1984, we have obligatory podcast banter. So, what have you been up to?
Well, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Carl. That's basically the long and the short of it. I've put about 50 hours in at this point. It only came out just under a week ago, 6 days ago at the time of this recording, just to give you an idea of how quickly I've put in those 50 hours. Still have a pretty long way to go through it, too. I knew going in that this is a large one, and I've been trying to complete all the side quests and all the mini games as I go, rather than just rushing through the stories. So, enjoying it so far. No spoilers, of course. Not that you have any, but no spoilers out there in the world either, because I am curious to see how it all plays out. It's mostly playing it pretty straight right now, other than a little bit of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey here and there. But I do know that they go in a new direction in the ending and of this segment of it. Because, of course, there'll be another game to complete the original game. But, yeah, interested to see how that plays out. But very much enjoying so far.
Very, very cool. Now, we've discussed this in the past. I was not a huge fan of the original game, but I have heard very good things about this one. So maybe once all the pieces are out, because there's no way I'm waiting 4 years between installments of an episodic, I may pick up a copy of it to try to experience what I didn't see last time.
And meanwhile, this diehard George R.R. Martin fan here is saying, "Oh, you sweet summer child, 4 years. That is but the blink of an eye."
No, this is true. This is true. Oh, well. While you were doing your epic gaming, I finally, I had to do it in small chunks, finally finished watching last year's remake of All Quiet on the Western Front. Uh-huh. And so, yes, if I feel slightly depressed today, that is probably the reason.
I can't imagine. I have not seen any movie adaptation of All Quiet on the Western Front, though I have read the book.
Okay, so yes, this was my third adaptation of it. And you know what? It's one of those books I keep meaning to read that I haven't gotten to. So at some point I need to read the book, but oh my God, this latest version is just so soul crushing.
I've heard.
Yeah, it's really great. I highly recommend it, but still.
And that's true to the book, because, I mean, it's been a while since I've read it, but, I mean, the book is basically life in the army is shitty, horrible, and boring, and then you die, is basically the theme of All Quiet on the Western Front.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert for, 4,000 years of human conflict.
Yeah. But this one is just especially nasty shit. So that's where I'm at. So anybody who's listening right now, if I seem slightly less peppy than usual, it maybe have something to do with that. So I promise to watch something funny before the next episode.
I am just curious, but how is that movie perceived in Germany? Because obviously, it's a German author from the German perspective in a very,
well, this was a German production.
fraught.
The movie is in German with German actors.
Yes.
But I did watch it. I did actually watch the English translation. I watched the English dub of it because I was curious just to see how it would work. I may go back and watch certain segments in English. Honestly, I didn't really notice any big reaction here in Germany to the film. It's obviously one of those classics. A lot of people read it in high school and so forth.
Right.
But yeah, I honestly didn't notice any major reactions here in Germany to it.
Interesting.
It's one of those ones. The one thing from a history buff standpoint, the one thing that it didn't do well, and this is probably a fault with the original novel, is the portrayal of the military situation in the last few months of the war. So the 3 months leading up to the armistice is basically the German lines have all but completely collapsed. The Germans are almost all in complete retreat with a couple of sections that were still holding on. And that's not how it's portrayed in the movie.
Gotcha,
so
yeah.
The movie, and I'm guessing the novel is also this way, it sort of underpins that Nazi mythology of we were still in the middle of France. Why did we give up? No, you weren't. American troops were already doing raids across the border into Germany. So
they shot their last wad in the spring of 1918 in their final mad dash to try to capture Paris, only to be stopped again at the Marne River as they were in 1914.
Exactly, and this is why I think that it's interesting to have that soldier perspective, and the absolute crippling stress of the war is beautifully portrayed on a human level, but a slightly more accurate depiction. Because, I mean, if it just stayed on the soldier's level, that's fine, but there's a bunch of scenes about the signing of the armistice and so forth, which shows a different perspective, which does zoom out. It would have been nice to have more of that zoomed out reality in it. But that's a minor quibble in a movie that is otherwise a phenomenal emotional ride. So,
indeed.
Okay, enough of that now. Let's move forward. Like I said, before we turn on the time machine, we've got a few stops to make. And of course, the first one is for me to remind everybody, if you're listening to this on YouTube, and I know we're getting a lot more YouTube subscribers lately, hit the like button. If you're listening to this in a podcast app, give us a rating, people. It does help. And also, if you have any comments or suggestions, you can contact us, videogamenewsroomtimemachine@gmail.com, or over the socials. All the links are in the show notes below. And also, if you're on YouTube, the show notes are not complete. YouTube has a max, I think, of 5,000 characters, and our show notes always go way, way past that. So, if you'll find a link there to the Patreon page. All of the Time Jump episodes are available on Patreon, and there you can see all the links. You can also listen to the shows, and if you're a Patreon supporter, just $1 a month, you will get, in addition to access to our now hopefully monthly live hangouts that we're doing, you will also get access to the Let's Play version with video and commentary of our first segment, the 7 Minutes in Heaven, where our intrepid co-host must play a game that was reviewed in a publication dated January 1984. And we had some real, as the Brits would say, corkers in this bunch. We had Jumpman Jr., we had Keystone Capers, absolute classic, which we may still get to next month, International Soccer on the C64, Revenge of the Mutant Camels, Masters of the Universe on the Intellivision, and, of course, Krull for the 2600, because, nobody loves a good fantasy movie tie-in that bombed better than us. Almost went with Chuck Norris Super Kicks because it's one of the first fighting games on a home console. But ultimately, we had to go with something that was just completely bonkers and off the wall. And that game is Moondust. And
that's right.
So, Alex, are you ready to spread some Moondust?
Well, I took my LSD about 15 minutes ago, so I think we are probably at the optimum point to begin this journey.
It wasn't the brown LSD, was it?
Can't recall anymore. We'll find out, I guess.
That's not good. That's not good, man. The brown stuff was the bad stuff. Sorry. Okay, if you guys don't get that, read up about Woodstock. Okay, so with that being said, let's go for it. Welcome back, Alex, from your 7 minutes in heaven. So, for the uninitiated, how would you describe Moondust based on your 7 minutes with the game?
Well, I believe some kind of cosmic entity, perhaps a god, perhaps an eldritch horror of a Lovecraftian nature, we don't really know, decided to take a whole lot of LSD and kind of did a reverse Katamari Damacy, where instead of, when getting all crazy, destroyed all life in the universe, went out and created all the life in the universe through some kind of panspermia. That I think that about covers it.
Sounds about right. So, yeah, I mean, this game cannot really be discussed without at least giving a brief background on its creator. And you know more about him than I do because you've actually read his biography.
Yeah, it's been a few years, but so I don't necessarily have all the detail retention, but Jaron Lanier had a very unconventional upbringing. He lived a lot of his childhood in a geodesic dome in New Mexico. He's a collector of all sorts of bizarre musical instruments, collector and player. Doesn't just collect them, he uses them. And he is a programming genius who was one of the truly foundational people in the creation of virtual reality, doing a lot of that early groundwork, not all of it, but a lot of it at Atari in the latter days of Atari Inc. when they really built up their R&D division in a major way. So he's very eclectic. He's very nonconformist. He's very non-traditional, and he's very smart. And it's no surprise that someone with those characteristics, plus a penchant for odd music, would come up with a game like Moondust here.
Yeah, and all of those passions come together. It's a weird-ass game where you're controlling a whole series of ships and a small character simultaneously, even though they're all flying around doing their own thing. But you have semi-indirect control of them, and you are supposed to drop some space seeds with your main character, then control the ships to grab that space seed and try to get it to a central point on the screen so that life can flourish or some such thing. And the whole time, the music is dynamically changing based on your movements. So
and it has that very kind of cosmic 60s, 70s sci-fi theremin-y type vibe to it as well, which does fit the mood of the game very well. I think it was quite effective.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And it's also, I mean, a graphical tour of the force at this point, especially with the trails of all the ships running simultaneously, all the ships, very, very little in the way of, your typical, sprites flashing because they're overlaid on one another and so forth. It really is a very well programmed game. And yeah, just don't think that you're going to figure out how to play it without the instructions manual. Because Alex wasn't able to.
No, I scored some points purely by chance, but it was purely by chance.
Yeah. So, looking at this game, would you recommend it based on your time with it?
Yes, I would. The two caveats. One, do read the manual. Don't try to just figure it out. And two, big seizure warning, because there is definitely a lot of flashing going on. But I thought it was very interesting. It's different from the typical fare of this time period. There's something almost hypnotic about the combination of the visual images and the music. And I can see it as being a kind of interesting, almost meditative kind of experience when you actually know what you're doing. So, yeah, I would say check it out.
Very cool. And I would go so far as to say there's still not a lot like this game out there.
No, absolutely not.
Okay, very good. So, with that being said, we only have one more stop before we can turn on the time machine, and that is to check in with our good friend Ethan, our warden of the Department of Corrections, to find out what we got wrong in our December 1983 jump.
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from
the Department of Corrections.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring. To accept charges, press 1. You may start the conversation now.
Welcome back, Ethan. So,
that's me.
So before we get into everything that we got wrong, or I should say that I got wrong in the December 1983.
It's not just you, Carl.
I occasionally get a whooping.
Exactly. He's here too. Hi, Alex.
Hello.
Here in the Department of Corrections for December 1973, the last month of the year, and 83. Before we switch on over into the new, brand spanking new set of years that you are going to be covering on the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
Yes. It's that time of year, everybody.
Indeed.
We get new music, new sound effects.
Yes. You will hear those shortly after the Department of Corrections gives its comment to one Mr. Alex Smith.
Oh, no.
So, Alex, when you were discussing Sente and talking about, that they were unsuccessful because they had the wrong business model, basically, was kind of the layout of that. Because that seems to be your opinion, yes?
I hesitate to commit to that because I forget exactly what I said, but...
Well, I wanted to bring up just kind of, Sente launches here right at the end of 83, their system that they're putting out into the arcades. And then right after that, Nintendo gets in, and they do extremely well with the Versus system, which, of course, is probably something you're going to be covering very, very soon.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the difference between these two companies?
One of them fits through a door? I'm sorry, but that was the thing that stuck with me about the first Sente box. One of them a door.
One of them has a profitable parent company.
Also, yeah, there's that as well. But it can also come down to the games in particular. I know.
Absolutely.
You like a lot of times, you like to kind of skitter around. Does good games make the company? But sometimes it's kind of true.
Yeah, despite all the evidence about EA. So, sorry, just kidding.
There are larger business forces at work.
Now I'm remembering what our conversation was. No, seriously, that did jog my memory. Yeah, obviously, other than their ice hockey game being kind of cool, they didn't have very good games, and that certainly played a role. I don't know that in that economic environment they would have had to have like one of the best games ever made, I think, still for their business model to succeed, though. Like, I don't think good games would have been enough. I don't think baseball, like VS Baseball would have been enough. I think they would have had to have a true world beater for that business model with the charging rent and everything to work. So I do absolutely grant you that we could have, or I could have spoken more on how bad the games were, because yes, that played a role. But I do think it was both. I don't think that business model was going to work unless they had the killer app of killer apps.
I have seen and played one Sente game. It's their driving game, and it's one of those ones you get to the edge of the screen and then the screen changes, and so you have to like super hard pivot. Ooh. Just like, yeah, it's not great. I know that you, Carl, hate scrolling racing games, but this would have been much better scrolling.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, the other problem is also, remember, this is a company with no track record at this point. Even though Bushnell is behind it, there's no track record with the team of developers. If Bally had tried to pull something like this off, or let's say...
Well, I can give you a counterpoint, sir.
I mean...
Sega.
Bally did try to pull this off.
I mean,
Sega
with the monthly
also tried
rent,
to do the
they
same
didn't try
thing,
to pull
and they
off the
launched
monthly
with a
rent,
very
though.
good game, which was Space Fury, which did do pretty well, but they still failed to make it work.
But they weren't trying to do a monthly rental fee.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I do think that monthly rental fee, was still not going to work. But yeah, the games were mostly terrible outside of Hat Trick.
Yeah.
So there's the bit on Bally Sente for now. Now, Carl, we have to clean out our file cabinets, for we are moving on to New Year's. You have given me extra work, so I will give you extra work in return. Are you ready, sir, to get your brand new certificate for the Department of Corrections?
Hit me. Show me why I won't get out early for good behavior.
All right. To the 1973 portions. Alex did bring up his interviewing one Mr. Gerald Gleason in speaking about Nutting's Wimbledon, but the main engineer on that was a man named Neil Domis.
Well, he finished it. But according to my interview with Gleason, which was via email, and I brought up Neil Domis with him, but he said that he did basically the whole design of it. So I think Domis probably only came in at the end. I do think Gleason was probably the main designer, though we would have to interview Neil Domis to be sure about that.
Keith has. So.
Yes, but we don't have most of that, I don't think. We just have what's in the book, right? I know he shared some of his interviews with us. But...
I cannot remember, but
yeah,
we will look at this, for we need to know all about all the Pongs all the time.
Yes. But yeah, Gleason definitely indicated that he did the majority of the design. So that
all right,
doesn't make it true, but
for now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then you also noted, Carl, that Elimination by Key Games did not have an advertisement in the trades yet, but there was an advertisement for Elimination. It is in the publication Marketplace, which is one that doesn't have a whole lot of stuff most of the time, but it is there.
And what's the date on the publication?
December 30th, 1973.
So that would still put it after the Quadropong, which was at the beginning of December in Cashbox.
Yes,
it was the
but
first or second issue of Cashbox of that month.
Yes, but also a lot of these monthly publications, they don't publish on the date that they say. But both Quadropong and Elimination are given ads in that, and I imagine they pretty much came out at the same time in terms of the ad copy. And just because it wasn't in Cashbox and don't know the specifics, later on you get a single mention of Elimination Plus, which is absolutely infuriating to me because that's the only mention of it. There's later an ad for Elimination Plus, which adds a cross shape in the middle. That's the only difference.
Why?
It was a thing.
Because they're copying the Exidy game Wipeout.
Okay.
Not Exidy, I mean Ramtech. They're copying the Ramtech game Wipeout, made by future Exidy VP of Engineering Hal Ivey.
Yes. So, I think they were pretty much advertised at the same time.
Okay, cool.
Now to December 1983. Here, and this is a question from the Department of Corrections out to the wider world. Was Sprite 1 the first commercially released software to use that term? Like, in the headline. Because I don't know.
Sprite 1 was, wasn't it hardware? That was a hardware add-on for the Apple II to allow, that gave it hardware Sprite capabilities.
I believe there's some kind of software component to it, but either way, is it the first commercially available thing that, uses Sprite
it wasn't,
outside of...
The word Sprite
word
shows up in the VIC-20 manual, doesn't it?
No, well, it first shows up in the TI-99-4 manual.
Okay.
TI appears to have invented the term Sprite. We don't know the specifics behind this. That appears to be where it comes from, but this is the earliest, it might be one of the earliest uses outside of TI.
Well, the VIC-20 has it in their manual. So I know the VIC-20 mentions Sprite, or at least that's what I have as my recollection. But that's one of those research questions we probably shouldn't be all looking up simultaneously on an actual podcast recording.
Yes.
Because everybody at home is like, wow, this is wonderful. White. Nothing.
Love the entertainment. And
let's see.
One last thing for December 1983. Carl, the Adventure International Hulk game was, in fact, released.
That wasn't the one I was talking about. I was talking about the Parker Brothers one, is the one that doesn't get released.
Well, you were in the middle of talking about the Adventure International license for Marvel Comics.
Yeah, and I said, unlike the other licenses, he actually gets some games out. Not as many as he wanted, but he gets some out, whereas... and this was the question of whether or not his license was only for computer games or if it could also have covered consoles, but the console rights were at Parker Brothers at that point.
Either way, you were wrong.
And as we will see in today's episode, there's a bunch of games getting canceled at CES, but we'll talk about that.
I wonder why.
Yeah, it's.
One
they
last
also had the Lord of the Rings license. Imagine what happened with that.
Indeed. And Carl caught something before I could as well on this episode.
Yeah, but that is clearing up already. It's okay. Sorry, couldn't help myself.
Well, he misstated that the famously Massachusetts town banned all video games in its vicinity, on location. Obviously, you can't prevent people from having their Ataris and whatnot. But it was Marshfield, not Mansfield.
Yeah.
I've been to Mansfield. I have not been to Marshfield.
Yeah, I caught it in the edit, and I was like, "Oh my god!" And I say it like 5 times in the episode too. It's terrible. So, got the name wrong. Sorry. So sorry, Springfield. I got the name wrong. No, just kidding.
So that will be it for the Department of Corrections for December 1973 and December 1983.
That was it?
Do you know what this means, Carl?
That means...
Do you know what this means?
I think we need to get boogie down. It's the 70s, man.
Indeed, it is time to activate the time machine, for we are going back to 1974. 1974.
You'll talk to the computer. After the eyes flash.
Welcome to January of 1974. Alex, what's our first story?
Well, it's a big one, Carl. D&D is released.
Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson's quirky combat game where each player controls a single character in a fantasy world while getting descriptions about what is going on from a master of ceremonies known as a dungeon master has been released to the world. The small set of books with archaic tables and statistics for everything from weapon damage to monster difficulties will go on to change the world of gaming, both analog and digital, forever.
Yeah, truly one of the most influential games on video gaming of all time, though, of course, it itself is not a video game. And really, I forget whether it was one of John Peterson's works, who is truly the expert on the early history of D&D, or if it was someplace else, but brought up the point that the thing that's remarkable about D&D is, yes, there are analogs you can point to before it, like diplomacy or Department of Defense role-playing exercises, war games, etc., but it's really unlike any type of game ever done before, and it's probably the first truly new category of game that humans have come up with in hundreds of years. And I mean broad categories now we're talking about. Obviously new games get invented, but board games go back forever, dice games go back forever, card games go back forever, sports go back forever. Video games are a new medium, but the types of games people are playing in video games are really not any different than in other existing game categories. It's just, in a new medium. But the idea of everyone sitting around and creating a moderated story together with the intervention of mechanics and die rolls only when adjudication is needed in a point where the players can't just make up the story themselves anymore. They need rules. It's a whole new type of game that essentially had never been seen before.
Very, very true. I never thought about it that way, but you're right. I mean, it's not unlike video games being a completely new art form. Yeah, this is a whole different type of game, and in many ways, it's a precursor to what computer games and video games will be. This
Absolutely.
idea of the moderator in the form of video games is typically the programmer or designer doing it ahead of time doesn't have that real-time effect of D&D. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy.
And of course, video games in D&D are inextricably linked immediately. The first D&D computer games on university network systems and whatnot come out in late 1974, early 1975, somewhere in there. It's a little sketchy getting actual release dates in that time, but they were at least being worked on in 1974 and perhaps even released in 74. It happens right away, and it's not a surprise, really, because there are so many parallels, because in D&D you are learning how to manipulate a system to create a scenario and a desired outcome. And that's what a computer programmer does. They're learning a system, they're learning how to manipulate that system and create a desired outcome. So the Venn diagram between people who enjoy, in these very early days, people who enjoy programming and people who enjoy this fantastic new D&D thing, that's a Venn diagram that overlaps quite a large bit.
Oh, tremendously. I mean, just think about all the statistics. It's almost begging for a computer to unload that off of you, especially these early versions of D&D, which, I mean, if you've played 3rd edition forward, it's so much lighter on the look up 1,000 different tables and, oh no, now these numbers are going in reverse and lower is better and stuff like that. It really is something that you want a computer to handle it for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, we've got D&D. We don't need anything else, right? That's all the news for 50 years ago, right?
No, these 50-year jumps are going to get more and more loaded as we get deeper in. At some point, they're probably going to need their own jump. As a matter of fact, I would imagine.
Oh, definitely. We'll be back to 3 jumps a month, just like we were a couple years ago.
Yes, but, despite this exciting new tabletop thing, video games are still out there. And it seems that blue sky operators catch Pong fever.
A clipping from the San Francisco Examiner shows how blue sky bizops, the crooked dealers who promise untold riches to unsuspecting marks, are trying to get people to buy into the Pong boom with promises of big money. $40,000 a year incomes.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. We've talked about the biz-off people before in various concepts, but basically Pong blew up in such a huge way outside of the capacity of the traditional coin-op 3-tiered system of manufacturer, distributor, operator to fully meet the demand. And it also gathered the attention of the public in a way that an individual game had never before. I mean, people were aware of pinball. Lots of people were, but as a concept, not as an, oh my God, this specific pinball game. And this was also during a period of time. This is the very beginning stages of stagflation are about to start. And there's a real hunger amongst the upper middle class, especially, to find something tangible to invest their money in rather than just letting it sit in the bank and get completely gobbled up by inflation. So there's this push that's like, hey, these things are really popular. You've read the newspaper articles about how they're making money hand over fist in a way these games never do. Everyone wants to play them. Every location wants to have them. I've got them to give to you. And so these blue sky operators, they're going after people like doctors and dentists and other people that have money to invest. And they're basically saying, buy this from us and, you'll be taking money in no time. But of course, what they don't tell you is, good luck finding a location for it that's any good. Because the operators, the traditional operators have those pretty much sewn up. And good luck if something happens to this product, because these are not traditional distributors who have a full service organization to help you with your games. They're just like, okay, here's the game, go have fun. So if you don't know how to service those games, you're going to have to hire somebody, which is expensive, and otherwise you're out of luck. So there is it's all a scam, because they're basically just giving you this thing and saying good luck, and you can't make money on it in that way. And of course they're getting in late, because of course these kind of scammers only come in when something is already blown up really big, because they need that public attention, public awareness, and glowing ecstatic news coverage to convince people that this is a good investment. But by the time the general press and financial community and whatnot have caught on to what's going on here, we've already almost reached the point of oversaturation. So on top of all those other problems, it's already kind of too late to get in on the craze.
Oh, definitely. And let's face it, if the stuff was really cutting edge, the blue sky bizops wouldn't be able to provide the hardware necessary.
No.
And just how widespread the hardware is getting comes from another clipping, and our own DOC warden, Ethan, he found this clip, also from this month. And there's this guy who is putting out ads saying that he could provide Pong machines. They're not calling him that, but ball and paddle games. And it's a real con job. He is in Ohio. He's taken $300 deposits, upfront cash, saying that he will deliver the machines later on.
Oh, no.
And then, of course, is not providing the machines. He acknowledges that he actually he can't make the machines fast enough. Too many requests came in. And he's currently under investigation. I don't know where this story ends or what happens to him, but I think that it's really, really telling that, $300 for a machine as a down payment seems reasonable at this time. I mean, multiply that by 5 to get where we are today, at least. And these are people, not putting down a tremendous amount of money, but it's also not chump change. It's going to take a lot of quarters to pay that back, and that's just the down payment. So, but it also means, everybody's figured out anybody with a bit of electrical engineering knowledge knows how to put one of these things together at this point.
Yes. But meanwhile, there are big changes afoot at the original Pong company as Atari sells Syzygy.
Atari has announced that their doing business as name Syzygy has been sold to Ted Dabney and will no longer be used by the company.
Indeed. So just for a little bit of corporate shenanigan background here, people commonly like to say that, that Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney founded Syzygy, and then when they went to incorporate, they changed it to Atari. Because of the way corporate shenanigans work, that's not quite actually true. So Atari was a new company. Atari Inc. was a new corporation. And then that corporation acquired all the outstanding shares of Syzygy. And because they had already built up some reputation with the Syzygy name, they decided to keep using Syzygy a lot of the time in the early days as a DBA, or doing business as name, which is basically just saying this is not actually the name of our company, but it's the name our company does business under. So they were still using the Syzygy name quite a bit in advertisements and interviews and whatnot. It was being used kind of interchangeably with Atari during this period. Well, this is the period of time when Nolan Bushnell is deciding that he wants Ted Dabney out of the company. But Ted Dabney is a partner in the company, so you have to buy out his share in some way. But the problem is Atari is still very much a bootstrap operation at this point. Despite the success of Pong, they're basically just they're taking their cash up front for Pong, turning around to pay their suppliers with the cash they get up front so they can build the Pong machine, give it to the person who wants it. So they don't have a lot of ready cash on hand. They're having to continually reinvest in the business, as many startups have to do. So he wanted Dabney out, but he didn't have the money to buy him out of his share of the partnership. So they came to a deal where they would give Dabney a promissory note that they would pay off over time for financial remuneration for the partnership, and that they would also give him, they say sold, but they really gave him. It's sold in the sense that his consideration was giving up his partnership stake. So there was consideration, there was something exchanged, but they basically gave him the Syzygy name and the coin-op route that Syzygy/Atari had operated since purchasing it from Nutting when they were setting out on their own as Syzygy. And so Dabney became an operator. He was allowed to use the Atari facilities. Their manufacturing facility at this very early stage, before they built their new kind of headquarters, was in a former concert hall and roller skating rink. And they let him use kind of a corner of that facility to set up his operation. And he came away with the root and got to call the root Syzygy. He took the name. According to Dabney said that there were hidden costs in this, though, because they gave him the name and they gave him the root, but they didn't actually give him the machines. So he actually had to pay rent to Atari on the machines on the root, according to Dabney. This is what he said in interviews in the 2010s before he passed away. won't go into all the details because I'm sure it'll come up again, but long story short, Atari has... The Syzygy route never works out well for Dabney, I'm sure in part because it was more expensive than he thought because of the rent. And Atari gets into even more serious financial trouble where they're actually losing money and can't make payments on the note. So they renegotiate the deal and end up taking the Syzygy name back and then give it to another person by the name of Ted Olson, who takes the Syzygy name and... ends up being one of the principals in the Timeout arcade chain, which is kind of the legacy of Syzygy, so to speak, going forward. So yeah, that's kind of the Syzygy name drama in a nutshell there.
Yeah, I knew that it had something to do with Ted Dabney being kicked out or leaving the company, and I knew it was something like this. This article in Cashbox is not really an article. It's literally just this tiny little paragraph or two.
Yeah, because they didn't know all the details. And I should stop for a second, though, since I know the Department of Corrections is salivating at this point. Ted Olson founded the Time Zone arcade chain. The Time Out chain is a different chain that was founded in 1970. But yeah, Ted Olson... basically, the new CFO of Atari kind of maneuvered to get him let go. Nolan Bushnell felt a little bad about it, and so when they took the Syzygy name and the root back from Ted Dabney in the renegotiation, Bushnell didn't actually want to do anything with it, and he felt a little sorry for Olson, so he allowed Olson to purchase all of that then from Atari, and then that was his entree into operating that then later in the year transformed into the Time Zone. I do know Ethan, who interviewed Ted Olson, incidentally, so this would be personal for our Department of Corrections. The Time Zone arcade chain.
Gotcha. Very good. Oh, well, so enough of all these coin-op shenanigans. Who needs coin-op?
That's right, because we have home games too, and you know what? Odyssey begins to get noticed.
While Pong clones are filling arcades everywhere, Magnavox's Odyssey is slowly beginning to get some traction in the public consciousness. Some newspaper profiles of the system appear talking about how various retailers, not just Magnavox dealers, got units in November. For some, the systems have been moving well, while for others, they have already taken the displays down because they did not move well enough. This comes as the $99 TV peripheral is already being made subject to post-Christmas discounts, with one retailer offering a $50 rebate on the system with the purchase of a new Magnavox TV. And,
so just... Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, a lot of this is just sort of taken from an article here, an article there. Again, a lot of Ethan's research on this is very, very useful. It's hard to get a real picture of how well regarded this is, or how perceived the product is on the market at this point. But it is interesting that it's starting to pop up.
Well, let me give you a little bit of context there, because this definitely has entirely to do with management changes at Magnavox. For many years, up until 1972, the head of Magnavox's consumer electronics division was a guy named George Fizell. And George Fizell had worked off and on with Magnavox since like the 50s. He had left for a period, but he was there for a long time. And he's basically the one that built Magnavox's success in consumer electronics through this system of licensed dealers and price maintenance policies, and really focusing on dealership support over necessarily consumer marketing initiatives. And that worked well as long as they were able to do their price maintenance policies, basically, to oversimplify it, but basically legal price fixing is basically what it was. But things changed as cheaper Japanese systems, televisions, and component stereos were coming in, and the FTC started looking really askance at this whole price maintenance thing. And Magnavox was basically told they couldn't do it in most states anymore, which all of this was going on against the backdrop of the launch of the Odyssey. So this system, this dealership system and price maintenance system that served them so well for decades, was suddenly thrown into complete disarray. Fazell was forced out of the company. He was forced into early retirement. And they brought in a new marketer from Singer Sewing Machines, Alfred DeCipio. And DeCipio was a big consumer marketing guy. And so he changed the entire approach to how they were doing this system. I mean, yes, of course, the Magnavox Odyssey was advertised. There were television commercials. There were magazine ads. It's not like they never advertised the darn thing. Of course they did. But they were really focused on this dealer-first kind of way of pushing their products rather than a consumer-first way. DeCipio completely changed that around. And we're starting to see the fruits of this. And one of the things that Alfred DeCipio had done when he was at Singer is he came up with the idea of sponsoring a Christmas special to be put out by some guy named Elvis Presley. This, of course, being what became known as the 68 Comeback Special. Which was when he kind of returned from the wilderness of his horrific Hollywood nonsense that he was putting out. And so he did the same thing for Magnavox. And he, at this time, the singer Frank Sinatra was retired from singing. He was not performing anymore. So DeCipio went using a similar strategy to what he used for Elvis in 68 and got Sinatra to come out of retirement to do a television special in the late 1973, sponsored by Magnavox, during which the full line of Magnavox products would be advertised in between Sinatra's performances. Then he went and got a spokesman for Magnavox products, which I know for the Odyssey they didn't have at this point, and I imagine they didn't have for anything, though I'm not as up on general Odyssey or Magnavox advertising practices. He went and got as a spokesman the baseball player Hank Aaron, who had finished the 1973 baseball season just like 2 home runs shy, I think it was, of Babe Ruth's all-time home run record. So he was one of the most famous men in America at this exact moment. And so in early 1974, he became the Magnavox spokesperson, and they started using him in ads. They started running sweepstakes. So the uptick that we are seeing, and it is a very real uptick in Odyssey sales, because we do have some sales figures. They sold 69,000, and this is straight from court deposition. This is straight from sworn testimony. So this is rock solid. They sold 69,000 in 72. 89,000 in 73, and they're going to sell 129,000 by the end of 1974. So it is growing a little bit, and the reason for that is almost certainly DeCipio's far more aggressive marketing and his move away from just relying on these dealer monopolies and price-fixing schemes, legal price-fixing schemes, that they had been relying on for the last couple of decades.
Gotcha. And
so there's your context.
And that is good context to have, especially because, let's face it, we need to know if people are starting to warm up to this idea, or if it's just, oh my God, we need to get rid of this crap that's filling up the warehouse after Christmas. And
yeah,
that is important context to have here.
Yeah, people are warming up a bit. They did have a glut after 72, but they got that glut cleared out in 73. And we're talking about mostly newly manufactured product being sold, not clearing out backlog, I mean.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Okay, so we've got the Odyssey coming. Apparently the revolution is here. We don't need anything else, right?
That's right. The revolution, however, will not be televised. It'll just be, a series of dots on your screen. Meanwhile, there are exciting things also going on in the computer world, as despite funding cuts, high schools continue to add computers.
The number of high schools that have a mini computer or at least a terminal in the U.S. is now estimated at between 10 and 20%. The rapid price drop in the mini computer category, for example, an HP 2000, which cost $100,000 upon introduction in 1970, costs only $50,000 in 1974, and still high hourly costs for access to large mainframes means that schools that want to give their students access to computers are finding it cheaper to go with the minis.
Exactly. And the many companies are very much realizing this, particularly DEC, which in this period has repackaged their P2P8. I mean, they have various packagings of it. It's still being sold to everybody, but they have a specific packaging of the P2P8 that is targeted at schools. And of course, they've had David All doing a lot of pushing of that for them. I think by 1974, he's already switched jobs to another area, but in the early part of the 70s, he was very much pushing that. And yeah, there had been an initial push in the 60s to start getting schools computerized, high schools computerized through time sharing. That did run into long-term issues because of the exorbitant cost, because you are being charged for those phone calls, and not every community has a time-sharing computer in their area code, which means a lot of those schools are having to pay long-distance phone charges in order to do time sharing. So the repackaging of the mini computer as an alternative for schools where they can actually own their own mini computer and keep it in some centralized district facility and then have time shared terminals at individual school buildings is really pushing the computer more and more into schools, though as it's indicated here, for a given value of more and more, because we're still only talking about no more than 1/5 of the student population, and it's also tends to be very concentrated in areas where there are universities or corporations that are particularly active in time sharing, places like Massachusetts, Minnesota, California, Oregon, etc.
Yeah. Well, and this idea, and one of the things that they talk about in this New York Times article about this is that the miniaturization of the components in the minis, and the fact that the mini manufacturers are embracing those new style components much more quickly than the mainframe guys are, is one of the major factors in the drop in prices. So the mainframe guys are still thinking bigger is better. And these guys are like, oh, there's a new smaller chip that does the same thing? Put it in there. And I think that is one of those movements, and companies like HP are at the forefront of that.
Yes, and DEC as well, because medium and large-scale integration, integrated circuits are becoming fairly standard at this point. We're not quite to VLSI becoming standard yet, but MSI has been long established, and LSI is getting pretty well established. And yes, like you said, these computers are coming down in price in that way. For instance, the P2P8, the variant being offered to schools is the P2P8/I, where the I stands for integrated circuit, because the P2P8 was released before integrated circuits had become mainstream, so it was still using discrete transistors mostly, but it has been redesigned, and HP is redesigning their computers as well. So yes, that is a very important call out for why this is happening.
Yeah. And speaking about miniaturizing things.
That's right. In addition to miniaturizing their mini computers, HP introduces programmable pocket calculator.
Hewlett-Packard has introduced the first pocket-sized programmable calculator, the HP 65, at just $795. The device uses magnetic strips to read programs into the machine. The device is coming as the price war in calculators is heating up. HP's previous big hit, the HP 35, has been hit by competition from Texas Instruments, which undercut its current $295 HP 35 with a $169 competitor. The HP 65 with its 16-digit display is a far cry, though, from the low end of the market, made up of $20 to $50 devices, many from Japan, that can only do 4 to 8 digits.
Yeah, I mean, we're at the height of the calculator wars now, and the demand for cheaper and more effective calculators is also driving a huge demand for cheaper and more effective silicon integrated circuits and the very earliest microprocessors. And we're really seeing, with apologies to the Odyssey, we're really seeing the factors that lead to the true birth of the home video game industry right here, because it's basically everything going on in calculators that is responsible for almost everything that allows the home video game to be possible. Everything from microprocessors to interchangeability. The inspiration for interchangeability came from calculators as well. So, yeah, this is incredibly important to what's just about to happen in video games over the next couple of years.
Definitely.
But now moving back to those big machines, we have big news from the world of mainframe computing as Watson Jr. steps down.
Thomas J. Watson Jr. will step down on January 31st from the three-man executive office that runs IBM. Watson is the son of legendary IBM executive Thomas J. Watson Sr., and together the two executives helped mold and build up the computing tabulating recording company that Watson Sr. joined in 1914 into the massive company that dominates the worldwide computer field in 1974. Watson Jr. is stepping down due to the company's mandatory retirement age for executives of 60, but will remain on the company's board.
Yeah, end of a real era there. As this is the end of Watson control of the company. And as legendary as Tom Watson Sr. was, and he was, Tom Watson Jr. Perhaps even more so, because he was more responsible than anybody in guiding IBM into the computing field. And he was the one that guided the company as it navigated the creation and introduction of the IBM System 360, which is really the mainframe platform that allowed them to completely crush all competition once and for all in that space. So,
yeah. And he's also the architect in many ways of the big U.S. government lawsuit on anti-competitive activities that is scheduled to start later in 1974. And also this month, the U.S. government has released their initial arguments ahead of the start of that trial. So, all of that, crushing the competition that Watson was doing is kind of going to come back to bite them a little bit here.
It is. And while they won't come off too bad at the end of it in terms of penalties, it definitely stagnates the company at a critical moment, making them unable to take advantage of some of the new advances in computing, like the stuff that is revolutionizing calculators. Though, spoiler alert, that'll somewhat work out for them in the end as well. But they definitely were on the back foot there, because the one thing about antitrust litigation is even if you win, you have to tiptoe so carefully during the litigation that it kills a lot of your forward momentum.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And this is what we've talked extensively in 40-year jumps about the litigation and its ultimate end, but and how it also helped influence the the business model of the IBM PC. But yeah, this is where it starts.
Absolutely. And speaking of events that can cause company economic turmoil, Japan braces for oil embargo-triggered downturn.
The Japanese economy, which has been used to 10% growth per year since its rebound began during the Korean War, is bracing for a rough 1974, with the Arab oil embargo hitting the imported resources-based Japanese economy hard. The issues were worsened by recent loosening of restrictions on imports to the country, made under pressure from the U.S. due to a growing trade imbalance. The Japanese government has already responded by placing a $3,000 limit on how much Japanese citizens can spend abroad and is considering imposing new restrictions on imports and foreign investments. Masaya Miyoshi, a specialist on international economic affairs, says that while Japan may continue to be a major player in the petrochemical, steel, and shipbuilding industries, a pivot to less oil-intensive industries like electronics and computers will be necessary to ensure future growth.
I think they might just get on that one a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. I mean, those are literally like the last couple sentences in this piece. And the New York Times.
Yeah.
And it was so perfect. I mean, just for everybody's historical perspective, the oil embargo, we've talked about it now for the last couple of months on the show in the 50-year jumps. That is having massive ripple effects throughout the world economy. We've talked about it in the context of the coin-op operators in North America, worrying about, are people really going to go out to bars with the price of gas? How much does it cost to rotate equipment around and so forth? But, Japan is really going to be affected by this. You've mentioned and talked about this extensively, both here and on your show.
Yep.
And yes, this analysts' idea that they're going to have to pivot away from oil-intensive industries to things that are going to be smaller, quicker, easier to manufacture, and where just doing it cheaper is not going to be enough, where they're going to have to start developing the stuff themselves, is going to be a key factor in what becomes the Japanese economy of the late 70s and early 80s.
Yeah. The Egyptians and Syrians launch a sneak attack on Israel, and halfway around the world, a new electronics industry is born.
This is why we get the NES, just saying.
But meanwhile, in other areas, we have Computer Animation Conference to feature at 2nd Annual New York Animation Festival.
The New York Animation Festival will highlight a myriad of short films from around the world, as well as screen some of the growing slate of adult-oriented animation features, including Fantastic Planet, Fritz the Cat, and Heavy Traffic. A big focus, though, will also be on the increasing use of computers in animation, with a whole computer animation conference being part of the festival's program.
That might grow into something, I guess.
Yeah, computer animation. There's something here, and we don't quite know where it's going to go yet, but it could be really cool. Obviously, though, it's not ready for prime time and for actual displaying in theaters, as shown by the movie Fantastic Planet, which, if you've never seen it, wow, if you thought you needed LSD for moon dust, you haven't seen Fantastic Planet yet, because it is some crazy ass doo-doo. It's this weird European movie, but the whole thing, or pretty much the whole thing, was done with a similar technique to the Monty Python animation, where it's hand-drawn figures that they cut out and manipulate by putting them. But it's so bizarre. So unbelievably bizarre. I just watched the trailer and I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I don't understand this. So yeah. And of course, Fritz the Cat and Heavy Traffic are both
Ralph Bakshi.
Products of Ralph Bakshi. I don't really need to say anything else about those. So, okay. But yeah, animation is having a moment in the sun, and computer-aided animation, that might turn into something.
And that something might be horribly dystopian, as 1984 meets suburban gridlock in Kid's Book.
The New York Times has reviewed Endless Pavement, a children's book about a future dystopia where humans live their entire lives in small mini-cars inside of large Homerola cars in an endless slow lane while an all-powerful computer mobile tells them what to do over their never-turned-off TV screens. This one, yeah, it sort of feels like 1984 updated for Suburbia. And you can check it out of the Internet Archive. I read about a third of the book. I don't know if I would read it to a child. It's really, really dark. I mean, it is some dark, crazy stuff. But it was definitely something worth mentioning, just, this whole idea of the computer-controlled society and replacing the idea of Big Brother with the, at the time, contemporary view of computers. It was definitely an interesting insight into the zeitgeist.
Yes, a dystopia that may still happen, but hasn't happened yet. However, another dystopian event that has come to pass, Travelers Insurance Company adopts SSNs.
We talked a while back about how the Nixon administration allowed for Social Security numbers to be used as identification by more than the Social Security Administration. Now, Travelers Insurance Company, a major insurance company in the U.S., has decided to replace customer account numbers with their existing Social Security numbers. While they offer to give someone an alternative number upon request, according to reporting by Computer World, one customer who requested this said the process was very difficult and would discourage most people.
Yes. Wouldn't it be great to just use our Social Security number for everything? Put our Social Security number on everything.
And this is interesting because this is an article in Computer World magazine. So it's talking to computer specialist people working on large mainframes and so forth. And the argument that they're reporting on, that people are making, is that this is going to allow for easy cross-referencing of data, collating data, creating profiles, basically everything we think about today through social media and everything else. They're talking about it in great detail because essentially the same principles apply. You just need to be able to connect the people somehow. And we talked about this, I think, a year and a half, 2 years ago already on the show, when the Nixon administration had originally proposed this. It was one of our old episodes. And this is the first time I've found an example of an actual company actually implementing it. Of course, they're saying, it's going to make everything easier and so on and so forth. Of course they are, because it will. But yeah. Welcome to the world we live in today, at least if you are in the United States.
Indeed. All right, I think we made it, Carl.
We're done. We finished this. This is it. The episode's done, right? Oh no! Wait, I see it in your eyes. Oh, you're right. We still have to jump forward another 10 years to go to January of 1984. But at least we get a brand new intro sound effect by Ethan.
Worldwide electronic violence. 1984. Intelligence. Collapse.
An awful lot of product that was inferior.
Welcome to January of 1984. Alex, what's our first of definitely very, very few stories?
Well, fewer than the crash year, at least. Our first story, Carl, is that Chuck E. Cheese grows up.
What do you do when a Chuck E. Cheese's Pizza Time theater location stops earning big bucks? Well, if you're Nolan Bushnell, you retool it a bit, add some pool tables, a dance floor, some private dining booths, and throw out the rat and replace him with a groovy DJ named Wolfman Zapp. And you got yourself a singles bar for the modern age called Zaps.
Good luck with that, Nolan. Good luck with that.
So, I'll be honest, I had never heard of this Zaps thing before.
I had not either, no.
And it shows up, there's a one-page article on it in Video Games, one of the magazines. Doesn't show up in anything else that I could find. They're talking about 3 locations. I found a reference to a Nolan Bushnell interview where he mentioned 5 locations having existed. I found then a reference to the location in Tampa, a mention of an address. I looked that address up online. It's a strip mall on Fowler Avenue, which today is a Dollar General, which is kind of sad, but from the size, it would have worked for one of these things. And yeah, and there's also a couple of these Zap robots, but it looks like it's only from the waist up, so it's probably DJ in the big open areas. But
Right.
There's no other footage available from these locations. The article talks about how they were trying slightly different models in different locations. The 3 test locations were going to be slightly different configurations, probably testing the waters to see what worked and what didn't work. But yeah, the idea that this was going to be like a singles bar type thing, with beer and whatnot, it's not a terrible idea. It almost sounds like a Dave & Buster's type of setup.
Yeah, it does a little bit. Now, Dave & Buster's, of course, already existed by this point. It was just the original location down in the South. It wasn't a national franchise. So,
yeah,
don't know if Bushnell was aware of the original Dave & Buster's or not, but, could have been partially modeled on that, but no idea.
Yeah, and they mentioned that, this was a way of what do you do with locations that were poor earners, and also maybe, what do you do with the people who have kind of grown out of the Chuck E. Cheese thing? Can you transition up with them? What do you do? But as the moment they serve alcohol, basically you killed off the teenagers.
Yes.
And I don't know if there would have been a large enough population of quote unquote adults who are going to be willing to put up with the video games at this point.
Well, let's put it this way, Carl. There is still a corporation masquerading as Chuck E. Cheese today. It's not the same, but we won't go there. But there is nothing masquerading as Zaps, so I think we have our answer.
Yes. It does not work for a variety of reasons.
Indeed. But you know what, Carl? Chuck E. Cheese isn't Bushnell's only restaurant endeavor.
The New York Times has published a piece on the Lion and Compass, Nolan Bushnell's Silicon Valley restaurant, a place for fine dining and deal-making.
Yeah, Atari was one of the very early companies in the Valley as we think of it today. Obviously, Silicon Valley became Silicon Valley as all the chip companies came in, but the name wasn't applied until the very beginning of the 70s, and this idea that it's this place where all of these tech entrepreneurs and tech bros come together to create the future of consumer life, that's not what the original Silicon Valley was. And so even though companies like Fairchild had been there since the late 50s, it was still very much in the 70s in this transition from fruit canning capital of the country to, electronics capital of the company. And so there wasn't much there. And Nolan founded this, invested in it in the 70s, because there wasn't a good restaurant in the Valley to wine and dine important people and make deals. So he basically said, then I'll create one. And obviously there's many places like that today, but Lion and Compass was essentially the first. I don't know that it was the very, very first swanky place in the Valley. I don't know the history that well, but certainly one of the very first.
Well, according to Bushnell himself in this New York Times article, he's saying, I started because there was no good place to eat.
Exactly.
Which would make sense under the circumstances. And this article really starts this idea that this is the deal-making place. Or at least it glorifies the legend of it. And the Lion and Compass is around until 2017. They don't close until 2017. Why they end up closing, I don't know. Their Twitter account is still there. There's no farewell message. It's basically just, come by for our whatever special event, and it's done.
Yep.
So, I mean, I don't know what the final history of it is, but it is interesting that this stayed around as long as it did.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, combining a little bit of legal and a little bit of crash with our coin-op unlicensed arcade shutters after killing.
March Toys, an unlicensed arcade in New York, which had been the focus of attempts to shut it down by the city of New York, closed abruptly on January 5th, 4 days after a teenager was beaten to death with a bat inside. The tragic death was unrelated to the arcade's operation and arose from a, quote, petty squabble, end quote, but the attention was apparently more than the owners of the establishment wanted to be exposed to. The arcade had successfully fended off efforts to shut it down by claiming that it was a retail business and that youngsters were not paying to play the games, but were making, quote, down payments on the games for purchase. A judge had granted them the right to continue operations as long as the machines were made exclusively available to those customers who had made down payments on them, a segregation which apparently never happened. The owners quietly took the machines and padlocked the location without leaving any notice.
Right. I mean, I have to imagine that in a way this is fallout from the collapse of the arcade market, because at the height of the craze, they probably would have dealt with the negative publicity to keep going. But I'm sure, I mean, I don't know, but I guess that they were like, this is not profitable enough anymore for us to put up with this nonsense.
Well, here's the interesting thing. That's not actually the way this reads. So what happened was that they were supposed to be shut down. It's not that the arcades were illegal in that sense.
No, I know.
These guys just didn't bother getting the permits, and they'd come up with this harebrained scheme. Oh no, you're not paying to play. You're making a down payment on the machine.
No, I get that. I get that.
Machine. But when the judge told them to segregate it, apparently nobody came by to check anymore. And this is where there's a bunch of quotes in the New York Times article by councilmen and so forth being like, hey, wait, we need to investigate. Why was this never followed up on?
I see. Okay.
And
that makes
suddenly,
sense.
It had flown under the radar. It's just like somehow everybody forgot about it and just let it go. But now, unfortunately, this horrible thing happened. This murder happened.
So,
in the location, and now everybody's looking at it going, so you probably have on the one side the people who are like, arcades are horrible, brutal places where teenagers do terrible things.
Yeah.
And these guys are just like, oh, we're not going to be able to pull keep our heads down and nobody will notice us anymore.
Forgive my black humor, but what they're basically saying is, and we would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for those damn kids and their little baseball bat too.
Oh, Jesus, that's so dark. Humor really does work. It's tragedy plus time. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, that's basically it. They probably would have gotten away with it. Nobody would have asked. It was too minor of a thing to worry about anymore. But now everybody is like, hey, wait, didn't we want to shut those guys down? And they just disappear. Apparently, they told all the kids suddenly one afternoon is get out, get out, get out. And then the machines were gone. That was it. And the lawyer for the guys was like, well, I can't tell you where they are. They don't want to be harassed and stuff. And yeah.
Yes. But speaking of something a little more linked to Crash Fallout, Nintendo sees profits drop.
Nintendo has announced that its year-to-year profits for the fiscal year that ended in August dropped by 3%, mainly due to the slowing U.S. coin-op business, but that they foresaw a 7% increase for the current fiscal year on expected stronger second half of the year sales in the U.S.
And, they've got the market pretty pegged because the coin-op, it is a separate Crash, and so it is on a completely different cycle from what is going on in consumer. And we are about to hit the bottom in coin-op, and it's about to start rising again as 1984 goes on. So,
yeah, and it's interesting. Now, this is coming from the Japan Economic Journal, English language Japanese publication. There was another write-up in there this month about Nintendo, sort of a side thing, where they did mention that Nintendo was also foreseeing profits coming from their sale of computers and games. Mm-hmm. And so I'm guessing, and this is purely conjecture, that when they mean computers, they're talking about the family computer.
Oh, absolutely.
And when they're talking about games, they're probably talking about the handheld games.
Mm-hmm.
But, that's, or maybe cartridges for it.
I think probably cartridges for it, because we're already past the point of the Game & Watch's greatest explosive popularity. I mean, obviously they continue making them, all the way to the early 90s, but it's already had its initial burst of massive success in Japan. So
yeah. Well, and this is one of those points where I don't know if it was just, there were a couple of issues with the grammar of the sentences. It may have been somebody whose English wasn't as strong as it should have been, or just didn't understand the product line. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, but other than that, we have no numbers on the Famicom yet. Those will hopefully be coming soon.
I imagine they will be. But right now, any look that we take at consoles is just about a barren wasteland. And as the smoke clears, the realities of the year of the Crash begin to emerge.
Oh, yes. As the new year dawns and the all-important Christmas numbers begin to trickle in, a clearer picture begins to emerge about just how big the fall from grace for the industry was in 1983. According to the Electronic Industry Association, 6.6 million consoles were sold in 1983, down from the 8 million sold in 1982. Some analysts and manufacturers put that 1983 number at only 5 million, though, according to the New York Times. The association and analysts are in agreement, though, that 75 million game cartridges were sold in 1983, which was up 15 million over the previous year. Sadly, 40% of those were apparently deeply discounted leftovers. A lot of 1982 stock was left over, such as Atari's ET, retailing for $4 to $10. According to Jerry Thompson, Vice President of Electronic Sales at Parker Brothers, 60 million cartridges were sold in 1982, but 30 million cartridges were still left on retailer shelves. Thomas Lopez, Vice President of Editorial Development at Activision, said that the discounting would continue, but did note that a few new cartridges did sell well. Promotional spend was also hit, with Frogger on the VCS getting a $5 million ad campaign in 1982, but Parker Brothers' follow-up hit, Q*bert, only getting the same budget because the ads were promoting the game on 5 platforms simultaneously. Now, for clarification purposes, the TV ad for Q*bert only showed screens for 3 of those versions, but they had apparently 5 SKUs out on the market.
Indeed. Well, the discounting will continue until morale improves, Carl.
We have a couple of contenders for quote of the month on this topic. And I guess I could bring it up right now. So, William Grubb, chairman of iMagic, and we'll be hearing more about iMagic here in a few moments. He was at CES and he told the New York Times, quote, "For this industry, 1983 was the year of humility." End quote. Which pretty much sums it up, I think, better than anything else we could do at this point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And of course, it's not just the console and cartridge makers that are feeling the heat here. Game retailers also hit hard.
Yes. The retail business has also been hit hard, with the specialty chains that first gave manufacturers access to clients being squeezed out by large mass merchandisers. Chess and Games, a 7-store chain, has entered bankruptcy, and Games, that's G.A.M.E.S. has shrunk from 6 to just 1 store. Games owner Joel Gilgoff said, quote, "The margins are so low that it doesn't appear there's any safe harbor in consumer electronics," end quote.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a good point that he brings up there. You know, we've talked before about how, you know, one of the few companies to continue to support video games during this time period was Toys R Us. And, you know, it would have to be, of course, large retailers, the only ones left, the large mass merchandisers that would be able to stay in the business, because they're the only ones that could get enough of a discount from the manufacturers for bulk ordering and just through general clout to be able to make anything as the margins vanish.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I mean, and we're going to see this more and more, and this was also the topic with the Coleco Atom, that there's going to be so few retailers at the end of the day still carrying the product. And I didn't put it in the show notes, but this was actually something that was coming out of the toy trade publications as well. There's a lot of hate going on after Christmas against Kenner, because they could not supply their Knight Rider licensed toys in bulk, even though they were advertising them like crazy. The Return of the Jedi line was made mostly of old product from Empire that they were rehashing. Care Bears were not available in the quantities that they were supposed to be. Cabbage Patch, when it was available, apparently was just going to the big retailers and so forth. So there's the little guys are getting squeezed out, and they're already warning the toy makers, like, hey, what's going to happen when there's only like 5 people you can sell to anymore? Which is a problem that we've talked about in our 30-year jump and back when we were doing 20-year jumps especially. So, you know, it's this problem of, you know, where you're going to put the product, who's going to be able to survive on those low margins. And, well, it's the world that Commodore and one Jack Tramiel has wrought. But
indeed,
we're going to talk about him a little bit
more on Jack in a little bit. Right now in our Crash Fallout, we continue with Mattel takes second place in list of biggest stock market losers of 1983.
The toy maker that had a bombastic Christmas with Masters of the Universe still couldn't stop the erosion of investor confidence over their exposure to the video game market, primarily due to their Intellivision console. At a drop of 69.9%, their market cap was the second biggest drop of a major company, according to Media General Financial Services, an analyst company. The top spot went to Baldwin United, a piano maker turned conglomerate that entered into Chapter 11, which dropped a whopping 91.9%.
Yeah, and I've mentioned this before, but Mattel, even with the success of Masters of the Universe and the continuing appeal of Barbie, Mattel would have also entered bankruptcy if not for the so-called junk bond king, Michael Milken, coming in and basically saving the company. And, you know, when I interviewed Tom Kalinske about that, he said that Milken said to him, because he was president at the time, you know, Barbie can't go bankrupt. And it was really only convicted and later pardoned Michael Milken who saved Mattel from a similar fate to one Baldwin United here.
Oh, yes. And, well, we've got a few more stories about just how bad this situation is getting for them. But here, Mattel's losses were actually overshadowed by another player in the home computer video game arena, though, as Spectra Video, you remember them from setting that whole little standard for the MSX in motion.
Yep.
Which had its IPO in 1983, and they lost a whopping 88% of its value from date of IPO to the end of 1983.
Yeah.
They just didn't make the list on the technicality that they weren't actually traded for the full year.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess Roger Moore in their advertising was not enough to save Spectra Video.
Indeed. And yes, as you said, we will continue to hear about how bad things are getting for Mattel. In fact, we'll do so right now, as Mattel reports further losses.
Despite a massive 55% bump in operating profits from its toy and publishing divisions, Mattel continues to slump under the weight of their electronics division, which posted another $82.4 million operating loss in the third quarter, leading to an overall loss of $46.3 million for the company for the quarter. So far, the company has racked up $222.8 million in losses in the first 9 months and does not expect to turn that around in the fourth quarter, ending at the end of January 1984.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are stunning numbers. Absolutely stunning numbers. And I mean, just to put in perspective how big their toy profits are. Mm-hmm. And this is a story I actually have for later on, but we'll throw it in here. They spent over $5 million airlifting toys from Asia to the States to get them on shelves in time. So they got 2 DC-8s chartered full of toys from their Asian factories just to keep supply going. I'm guessing not a lot of Aquariuses on those planes.
Probably not.
Probably not. And just also, I didn't include this, but the Aquarius ads that are running in the UK weeklies in January are not being run by Mattel anymore. They are actually being run by the Taiwanese manufacturer. We talked about this a couple months ago, where Mattel had sold back the rights to manufacture to them, and they are the ones. Yeah, Radifin is now directly selling the devices, the computers in England at this point. So yeah, it's a toughie, and I mean. Mattel ostensibly still has stuff in the pipeline. Like I said, this month, Masters of the Universe for the Intellivision gets tested in magazines, reviewed, and there was supposed to be a ColecoVision version as well. And curiously enough, we finally got the prototype leaked on that just last month. So December 2023, we can finally play the Coleco version of Masters of the Universe. It actually looks really, really pretty for a ColecoVision game. But yeah.
Yeah. And, you don't really need special powers or a crystal ball for this one, but it seems the industry predicts Mattel's exit.
While Mattel continues to insist that the Intellivision will continue as they show off their wares at CES, but almost every other manufacturer said privately to the New York Times that the system is no longer viable.
Yeah, we've already brought this up a few times, how they had to keep up appearances, but nobody's fooled, and of course they're not fooled. They read the financial pages.
Well, they know what the sales numbers are on the existing games. Everybody knows, and we'll talk about this more as we get into, canceled games and so forth, but pretty much everybody has written it off now, and nobody is planning any further releases for the Intellivision at this point.
Indeed. And now moving on to a rather big one here, Murdoch announces intent to buy big stake in Warner.
Rupert Murdoch, the Australian newspaper magnate, purchased 7% of ailing Warner Communications stock in what he termed an investment at the time. Now, on January 3rd, he has filed with the U.S. regulators his intent to purchase at least 25% of the company's shares and up to 49.9%, the legal maximum amount allowed under antitrust law. Warner has countered by announcing a deal with TV production company Chris Kraft to make mutual investments in each other and to issue additional shares. The Chris Kraft subsidiary in which Warner plans to invest owns 6 TV stations, which would make Warner a broadcaster, something a foreigner like Murdoch is not allowed to be under current U.S. regulations.
Yeah, so this is the beginning of Steve Ross's fight for his life. Rupert Murdoch wants to break into the media markets in the United States. He's already conquered Britain with his newspapers. In the U.S., a far better way to go about this is through television and visual media. And he is coming for Warner Communications, and this is only possible because the Warner stock is in free fall due to the collapse of Atari. And this right here, and we've talked about this a little bit before, but this is right here is why Steve Ross decides he cannot wait for Atari to pivot, transition, turn around, reinvent itself. It is dragging his company down, and he could lose his company.
Oh, yeah. Well, that and a lot of other high-tech gambles Warner had been investing in. So not only is the Atari thing an issue, but Warner is also making cuts to other ventures such as its interactive TV system Cube, QUBE, which has failed to garner the interest of other cable providers who could also carry Cube's nightly 90-minute programming block. Remember, Warner at this time is also and will remain a big cable provider. They were investing heavily in that area. Proposed video on demand services will also not be rolled out due to the lack of partners to help fund the project. An analyst from Payne Weber also said that the investment in Warner's are probably overvaluing Atari, which is, by his estimation, worth no more than $200 million at this point.
It sells for $249, so he was pretty close there.
Yeah.
Of course, Murdoch will ultimately be unsuccessful, at which point he says, fine, then I will build my own television network with blackjack and hookers. And, Fox was basically the blackjack and hookers network when it started in the 80s. So that works triply well. So doubly well because of that, and triply well because I was quoting a Fox show.
No, this is true. We all know the first thing that you got to see on Fox was Married with Children. Yay!
Yes, indeed. And of course, we are equal opportunity here at the Time Machine, so we have to check in with the other major players, and it seems that Coleco announces losses.
Oh, yes. It's time for those quarterly reports. Coleco announced a loss for the fourth quarter due to problems in their Atom computer production. Who would have thunk it? The year as a whole would still be profitable, but the news broke during CES, where Coleco announced a 5.25-inch disk drive for the Atom. They're not going to stick with their weird little cassettes. This more standardized form of data storage, which Harold Fogel, an analyst from Merrill Lynch, said, quote, almost everyone is going to discover they need, end quote, will boost the price of the computer, which is at $700 after the New Year price hike, to about $1,000, dissolving the system's price advantage. Coleco also announced an Atom add-on to make the machine IBM PC and PC Junior compatible, a claim many analysts seriously doubted.
I wonder why.
Yeah. Coleco also came clean on how many Atom computers actually got produced in 1983. The original estimate of 500,000 was reduced to 120,000 late in the year, and that was still dwarfed the actual figure of 95,000 machines. Coleco claims to now be able to produce 100,000 units per month in their New York State factory. Yeah. Now, in addition to all of this, there's also a report this month in the UK weeklies that the machine will finally be released in the UK. And I know for a fact that it is because one of our patrons actually owns one in the UK. He couldn't make our last live session. He's going to try to make the next one and we'll be able to see it. I am dying to see this thing because he's had to trick out a few things in it. I just want to see it. It looks
that sounds cool. Like a treat. It sounds like something that I'd buy for $1, Carl.
Well, pretty soon that's what you're going to be paying for this thing.
Get those Patreon pledges in.
Now, I do have an additional fun quote here from Arnold Greenberg, president of Coleco. At CES, he told New York Times when discussing defective Coleco atoms, because apparently there's a lot of them, quote, "You still hear a few horror stories, but they are almost all about machines that were shipped a while ago and just recently put on the shelves," end quote. Yeah.
It's fine. Those are still the old models. And yes, you could still get one of those old models, but it's fine.
Yeah. But this admission that they need to go with a disk drive. Yeah. That their weird tape drive thing is not a viable option.
We may hear more about weird tape drives later in this episode, Carl.
I was just about to say, they are learning a lesson here. And remember, the Atom was being sold as the machine that comes with a word processor. So it's basically the productivity computer, the cheap productivity computer. We're going to hear a lot about that this month. Just saying, it's coming. But the $1,000 price tag is suddenly really, 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 really pricey.
Yes, indeed.
And whether or not the disk drive actually got released, I honestly don't know.
I don't know either.
I don't think so, but
would not surprise me. And how about that IBM PC compatibility?
Yeah,
we're certainly going to make our cheap 8-bit computer compatible with a 16-bit Office computer.
That one makes absolutely no sense other than you put an entire IBM PC on an extra board.
That's what you'd have to do.
Yeah.
And why are you bothering? Get a real one at that point.
The problem here is the concept is about to collapse. I mean, there was an ad this month in one of the UK mags where you could buy an entire Commodore 64, what they called the business system, printer, disk drive, color monitor, C64, plus software for £899. Pounds.
Right.
But now you're up to maybe, in
probably
US
about that
terms,
$1,000 where the Atom's living.
Yeah,
a little higher,
maybe $1,200.
Yeah.
But that's UK, always more expensive.
Right.
Now you're hitting the point of just buying a C64 with all the trimmings.
Yes.
And yeah. So
absolutely. But back on the console scene, MB Milton Bradley closes GCE.
Milton Bradley has announced the closure of their General Consumer Electronics office. Now, GCE was responsible for the marketing of the Vectrex. Bringing that product line into Milton Bradley itself will hopefully lead to more efficient handling of the line.
By which I'm sure they mean it'll be easier to sell it to a liquidator.
Yeah, pretty much. This is the last leg of the Vectrex now.
And the last leg of Milton Bradley. Who doesn't have a Michael Milken around to
I mean, yeah, Milton Bradley
Barbie can't go bankrupt, but Candyland can.
The Candyland can.
That's right.
Who ends up buying MB anyway?
Hasbro.
Okay, that makes sense.
Later this year. This will be coming up pretty soon.
Yeah. That happens fast.
Yep. And in third-party news, Imagic turns freelance.
After having to cut staff, Imagic seems to be giving up on its dreams of being a major force in publishing and instead is partnering with publishers as a developer. Parker Brothers, which is going forward with a big slate of games, is in talks with Imagic to port Atari's arcade hit Star Wars to home systems. Now, I went through Moby Games. I went through the packaging for these games. There's no mention of iMagic anywhere. But if you look at the credits for the home systems, those are iMagic employees making it.
There you
go. It's clearly an iMagic game. It makes sense. I mean, it's a Herculean task to try to port that game onto a 2600. And iMagic would have been one of the only two companies probably that could have pulled it off. iMagic or Activision at this point.
Makes sense. But while that Star Wars game is going to make it to market, not all Star Wars games are going to make it to market as game cancellations continue to mount.
Oh yes. It almost can go without mentioning, but tons of games have been canceled. CBS, Parker Brothers, and iMagic have canceled all Intellivision games on their slates. Parker Brothers' Ewok Adventure for the 2600 has been dropped. iMagic has canceled further developments for Atari's low-end machine, and basically the list keeps going and going and going. Just too many to mention here. At a certain point I started giving up. I mean, I do a lot of contributions nowadays, and I've mentioned this before on the show, for the website Games That Weren't.
Right.
I'm contributing titles there all the time, but there's so many at this point that I just don't bother if they've been mentioned someplace else. I just bypass them because there's no point in mentioning them anymore.
Absolutely. So, moving on to the one place where consoles still have a little bit of play in them right now, Sega signs deal with Broderbund.
Sega and Broderbund have announced a licensing deal that will see Sega bring Broderbund games to the SC3000. The most important of these titles is, of course, the Super Hot Lode Runner. According to the Japan Economic Journal, Sega is feeling pressure from, quote, home appliance makers, end quote, for their console and need to beef up their software library to remain competitive. And this is clearly a message, or an they're referencing the MSX here. And we talked about this last month about how the MSX being manufactured by companies that normally make home appliances and sold in those type of stores was really making inroads outside of the big cities. And that's what they're talking about here. Sega cannot rely on their own games alone. They need these non-arcadey games to be able to compete, and they have to have the same games that are going to be coming to the MSX.
Yep. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And so they're licensing games. They're building up that portfolio. No word on what Nintendo's doing right now, but so we'll see how that develops.
Indeed. But for now, we turn our attention to CES, where videotape and compact discs wow attendees.
The Winter Consumer Electronics Show, held in Las Vegas from January 7th through January 10th, featured a plethora of new video cassette recorders as well as 2 new 8mm video cassette formats from GE and Kodak, which will further muddy the waters for consumers in the existing beta versus VHS wars. Compact disc players for cars are also a much hyped category, but fears that discs will melt in hot cars may curb adoption. The sick man of the burgeoning consumer electronics industry that is estimated to double in revenue in the coming year were video games, where no major new hardware releases were announced and only a handful of new games shown.
Yeah, and this is something that I've mentioned a fair amount, but doesn't really get mentioned in a lot of sources. That was not, I think, causative of the video game crash, but certainly didn't help it. Is that consumer electronics are very expensive buys. Households only have a certain amount of money to put towards those buys. And 1984 is the year that the VCR, by virtue of VHS basically winning the format war and driving down prices, becomes the new hotness. And you can't really, if your choice is buy a video game system, a cheap home computer, or a VCR, this is the year that people are going to go for those VCRs.
Oh, hell yes. Hell yes. This is when the video stores start popping up everywhere. And it's just insane. And it coincides also with this resurgence of the blockbuster movie in theaters.
Yes.
There's, all this pent-up demand for content. And the fact that, once you have it and you can go and rent any of the old movies that you used to have to wait ages to maybe catch on TV, the newness of it is just tremendous.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's not a good time to be in the video game business.
And, fun fact, just about all of this. So my family was living in South Korea at the time. We were there in 84. I think this probably actually may have happened in 85, but it's all in the same time period. We didn't live on base because we were civilians. We lived what they call on the economy. So we lived in a Korean town. And there was one time where our house was broken into, and they were obviously startled in the middle of it because, they had taken out a lot of my mom's jewelry and stuff, and it was, on the bed, being all gathered up. But something obviously spooked them, in the middle of this. But what's the one thing they grabbed? They made sure to get out of there. The one thing that we lost in this theft? The VCR.
Massively expensive piece of hardware at this point. Mm-hmm. Massively. And I remember in 84, we rented a VCR. Didn't own one yet. We didn't own one until 86. Mm-hmm. But we rented one night. And I remember I rented Tron. That was the movie I rented. I had seen it in theaters. I wanted to see it again. And just that experience of being able to pop in a video and watch something on demand and stop it. And whatever. It was just mind-blowing. It was like being in the future.
Indeed. And let me tell you, as I said, at this time we lived in Korea, where the copyright laws weren't as well established. So the library on base, the military library on base, had tape duplication equipment.
Oh, wow.
And so when I was a kid, all the Disney movies, all of the Star Wars trilogy, and quite a few other movies we had in our own tape collection, not taped off of television with commercials, but duplicated from the tapes that the library had, and it was all quasi-legal because of where we were.
Asian copyright law. That's a fun one. We're going to talk more about that today still.
Indeed.
At this point in time. It's crazy. It just is crazy how much is going on. But you're completely correct. I mean, with limited budgets and so many different electronic devices vying for your attention, households have to decide which one are we buying. 84, the decision, or 85, the decision for us was a computer, not a VCR. 86 comes the VCR. So it's just the nature of that beast.
Absolutely. But moving on to Commodore news, and we have some big Commodore news coming, but we'll bury the lead a little bit and start with Commodore introduces the 264 and 364. Take things in chronological order here.
Very much so. So the only major computer introductions on the first day of CES were Commodore's 264 and 364 computers. Both are 64K home computers with built-in productivity software, a first for home computers. But Commodore refused to say exactly which programs would be included. The 364 will also have a built-in speech synthesizer. A machine should be out in April, but no prices were given, something that might give competitors Coleco and Atari, whose price hikes on their machines in the new year are their last big hope in stopping the price war that killed Texas Instruments' effort in the home computer market. Some analysts were a bit confused by Commodore's strategy, as the new systems don't seem to be more powerful than the existing C64, but will also not run the C64's growing library of software. Yeah. This one is funny and interesting and weird for a variety of reasons. The machine that will ultimately come out of this is the Commodore Plus 4 and the Commodore 16. So these numbers will disappear. The article in the New York Times has a wonderful picture of a smiling Jack Tramiel holding up these two machines, and they're basically the same thing, it looks like, the Commodore Plus 4. Yeah. And he's looking over his shoulder as he's holding him up. It's a beautiful shot of a man who doesn't know what's about to happen.
Yeah, but I mean, it's classic Jack, though, right? Because Jack was a hardware guy. He never cared about software. So from his perspective, not compatible with C64 software? Not important. People will just make software for this too, because he doesn't understand software. And the other thing is that Jack is always like, okay, this company's making that, give me one of those, but cheaper. So even though the Atom at this point is obviously a disaster, it's very clear he told his engineers, I want an Atom killer. And so it's classic Jack. It's whether the product makes sense or not doesn't matter. It's just, can you deliver me a piece of hardware that is better and cheaper than this other piece of hardware? And don't worry about the software. That'll sort itself out.
Exactly. Now, we'll talk more about this when it actually happens, but the Plus 4 is infamous for the fact that the software that's included in it is terrible.
Right.
Absolutely terrible. And the spec down graphics chip that's in it is not capable of doing the sprites. It's not capable of doing the same things that the Commodore 64 can do. The sound chip's not as good as a C64. So had he just done a C64 plus the software, that would have probably been a machine that you could have
I'm sorry, Carl, I have to interrupt you. I'm getting breaking news from the show floor at CES.
No.
It appears Jack has resigned.
Jack Tramiel, the 55-year-old co-founder of Commodore, has unexpectedly resigned as president, chief executive, and as director of the company on January 13th, 1983. According to a company statement, Jack said, quote, personal reasons prevent my continuing on a full-time basis with Commodore, end quote. This comes as Commodore has bested its rivals, won the price war, and was expecting 1983 revenues to surpass $1 billion, a first for a microcomputer maker, and net income to exceed $100 million.
Yes. Now, of course, no one knows 100% for sure what happened. We do now know more than we used to. What we do know is that there was a private conversation between Jack Tramiel and Chairman Irving Gould at CES that turned heated, and Jack stormed out, drove off in his sports car, and never returned to the company. That's all we knew for certain for a long time. After Jack died, Leonard Tramiel, friend of the show and youngest son, did open up and explain what happened in that room, that specific disagreement was over Irving Gould's use of Commodore assets for his own personal use. I'm sure the private jet was probably a big part of what that complaint was about, because there was a jet that Gould liked to use. And that basically Jack said, that's not happening while I'm here. And then Irving Gould said, okay, fine, then goodbye. So that was the immediate prevarication. However, that, and Leonard says that's the reason why he left. He does a very simple point A to point B, but that's not the reason that he left. That was just the straw that broke the camel's back. Other observers, including other observers that were at the company at the time, that were within the company, are positive it had to do with the fact that Jack wanted to cement his family legacy at Commodore by bringing his 3 sons in. Irving Gould wanted nothing to do with that, presumably because that would be too much of a threat to his own position, even though he'd still be the majority shareholder and have the purse strings. Having too many Tramiels around could turn ugly for him. And it is almost certainly, we don't know for certain, but almost certainly that conflict over Jack Tramiel's sons and the future of the Tramiel family at Commodore that caused the bad blood, that caused the increasing disagreements, that led to the final big fight, in which Gould used that as a pretense to kick him out. He was probably already looking for an excuse to kick Jack out, and that was the convenient one at hand.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I talked extensively with Leonard. I never got the feeling Leonard actually wanted to stay at the company. He wasn't working directly with Commodore at the time. So yeah, but he was at that CES. I mean, cause him and his brothers had given Jack that sports car. That was a gift at the CES. Yep. Now, I agree with you that Irving Gould, I can very much see him be worried about that. Obviously, I've also talked to the former Commodore treasurer, and he pretty much wanted to stay out of the question of what actually happened in that room. And Leonard is also very open that he was not in the room. Right, he just knows what his father said. Yes. But you're right. It was definitely something that had been building over time. Commodore had gone through way too many people, way too many executives and other officers had come and gone because of Jack. In a couple of months, we'll be getting a game called Jack Attack. Yeah. Coincidentally, right after Jack left, the game gets called this, and there's an interesting article we'll be talking about it.
And, of course, Gould had already started hitting out against Jack in the press as well. There was, I think it's already come out. I don't think it was later in 84, because I'm pretty sure it was at the company. There was an infamous article that came out in Business Week labeled Albatross. And, this article was basically supposed to be about how the company was about to become the first $1 billion company in the home computer business. And I'm sure that's how it was probably pitched to Jack. But when it came out, most of it was about how the company became a $1 billion company despite its CEO, Jack Tramiel. And it was very clearly an orchestrated, this is what Brian Bagnall thinks, and it's author of several Commodore books, and it's a very reasonable belief, that this was Irving Gould orchestrating this very public attack on Jack in the press to weaken his position and make it easier to convince the board and others that it was time for Jack to go.
That would make perfect sense. I mean, let's face it, the way Jack was running the company with these very expensive price wars. these almost personal grudges, like against Texas Instruments. And like I said, once they start looking at the books, they realize they've got a ton of unused components sitting in warehouses. There's the actual organization, the management of the company wasn't long-term planning. It was just, what do we do this what do we do this year? What do we do next year? At a time when, and we've been talking about this for 2 years now, more and more and more stuff is moving to the standardized IBM PC. This idea that you're going to be able to just dump your entire format every 2 years or every year is no longer a viable business model.
Yeah.
And that's...
Yeah, and you see, Irving Gould's entire lifestyle is tied up in Commodore. He has taken to being a very, very elite, jet-setting kind of person with, houses and properties all over the world. For tax reasons, he has to calculate how long he spends in any one place. And he lives a luxurious lifestyle. He loves his luxurious lifestyle, and he is only able to maintain that luxurious lifestyle so long as the Commodore stock continues to run. And he is seeing, I think, all of this stuff as threats to the stock. Like, he doesn't care whether Commodore's a successful computer company. He doesn't care if Commodore's a market leader. He doesn't care if Commodore is a big name, worshipped in the way that people, worshipped Apple, after the launch of the iPhone 1. He doesn't care about any of that. But the one thing he does care about is the stock price, because that is how he maintains his lifestyle. And I think he sees Jack's methods as not being able to keep that stock price pumped up in the way he needs to maintain his lifestyle. And just to correct myself, it was Forbes, not Business Week. And it was almost a year ago on January 17th, 1983.
Okay.
Forbes is a weekly, so it was the week of January 17th, 1983, that article came out. And that was the first sign a year before these events that not all was well in Jackland at Commodore.
That makes perfect sense that this was building. And like I said, with that whole PC thing, that's another thing that the New York Times is talking about CES.
Yeah.
That the focus seems to be now on higher priced machines like IBM's, the soon to be available PC Junior. Apple seems to be resurgent, even though Apple never really attends CES, but they have a token booth there. And they're announcing that they've shipped 100,000 Apple IIe's over the holidays. Now, granted, a lot of those were discounted because Apple is feeling the pressure as well to try to keep going. And the Macintosh is coming. It's the low end. Yeah. Is just the low end. Commodore has no plans for the high end. They've got nothing in the pipeline. This is what, a co-founder of MOS, the chip designer, 6502
Chuck
designer.
Peddle.
Thank you.
Chuck Peddle.
We talked about Chuck Peddle said this a few months before this. He said, Jack's got nothing in the pipeline going forward. He's going to have a great year or two, but he's got nothing after the C64. Mm-hmm. And, and Irving Gould is often not given credit for understanding technology and where things are going. He understands it a lot better than people think. I think there's also an element he knows he needs to do something else because, like you said, he likes that stock. He likes that lifestyle that the stock allows him, and he can't just be feeding off the low end of the market forever.
Absolutely. And seriously, another sign that this had to be at least a little bit pre-orchestrated in the sense that Gould was already looking for an excuse is that it takes no time at all for Marshall Smith to be named new head of Commodore.
Oh, yeah. Tyson Bornemisza. I think that's how you pronounce the name of the company. Yeah. Chief Executive Marshall Smith will assume the role of President and CEO of Commodore as of February 21st. Smith had been at Thyssen-Bornemisza and its predecessor since 1966 and had been CEO since 1977. Irving Gould first met Smith in 1978 when Thyssen-Bornemisza purchased a shipping container company Gould had invested in.
Yeah, we don't know much about Marshall Smith and his very short-lived tenure as CEO of Commodore, but I get the sense, I mean, obviously it's someone that Gould already knew, but I also get the sense it was someone that Gould knew would take orders. I think he wanted an empty suit in there that he could control more directly than the volatile Jack Tramiel.
That is definitely something, and I also think that I agree with you that he had this plan. There was one mention in one of the articles that apparently Smith didn't want to sign up until Jack was gone, which means that it was already planned. There's some quotes from Gould like, well, Jack has just been going nonstop for so many years that, he just wanted a personal break type of thing. And the fact that he steps down not just as CEO and president, but also from the board. This goes towards what Leonard said, that his father was like, when he was done with something, he just cut all ties.
Right.
And obviously that's also going to have an effect on the stock, because there's going to be a certain amount of panic over, what does Commodore look like without Jack?
Well, yeah, and of course, at this point from the outside, it looks really bad because they're just about to hit $1 billion in revenue, just about to announce it, I should say. They've already hit it. And they're getting rid of the CEO who brought them there. But of course, as everyone will learn very quickly, there is a lot of underlying rot, and the revenue is not sustainable. So, and obviously Gould already had to be aware of that. Tramiel got to leave on the high note because the fall is coming.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, Commodore is, you can't have that many different computer models going at the same time, all cannibalizing one another without some serious issues.
Exactly. But we turn our attention to the rest of CES now as game-selling terminal competition heats up.
According to the New York Times, at least 5 companies displayed computerized software vending systems at CES. We've talked about Romox on the show quite a bit, but they were joined by Xanti Corporation and Kuma Technology Corporation. Kuma is backed by Nolan Bushnell.
And founded by Alan Alcorn.
Ah, I did not know that. Founded by Alan Alcorn.
It was Al Alcorn's company.
Cool. Now, while Romox is going for carts, Xanti's system can do both carts and disks, but must be operated by a clerk. Kuma's system is fully operated by the customer printing out a receipt with instructions. The systems have divided software makers, with some like Mattel, Sierra Online, Epix, and Creative Software contributing programs to the pilot projects, and others such as Atari, Activision, and Parker Brothers staying on the sidelines. William H. Bowman, chairman of Spinnaker Software, said of the systems, quote, "I hope they all fail miserably," end quote. James Morgan of Atari said, quote, "Cartridges become commodities under that system," end quote. And Atari is, quote, "totally opposed," end quote, to in-store electronic distribution. Maybe they are because they are still hoping to pull off in-home distribution through their joint venture with Activision that we talked about last month.
Well, I think there's probably some legitimate concern here, though, as well, because the whole commodity thing is true. It destroys margins. And, skipping ahead in our story a little bit, this is exactly what Nintendo finds, because the reason the Famicom disk system fails is not the piracy concern, though that is a concern. The reason it fails is because the margins that third parties have on that thing are so slim that companies like Capcom go out and develop larger cartridge memory sizes because even though that makes the product more expensive, their margins are so much higher, it's still better than going for the disc system. And obviously this is cartridge, not disc, but I think the same thing applies. Once you get that in-store distribution and you're getting rid of packaging and all of these other things that add a perceived value to a product, it becomes a commodity, as Morgan says, by which means the margins become incredibly bad.
That's definitely true. I mean, and it's also indistinguishable at that point.
Right.
I mean, because then the games are going to be there forever. It's the Steam problem.
Mm-hmm.
And if you haven't heard it yet, because you're not a patron, my interview with Michael Hengst, the second part of which is online, we go deep into the market effects on game production of Steam, of this idea of 10,000 games a year going online and this ever-growing back catalog of titles that are all basically equal in the eyes of the player.
Right.
So yeah, no, they're completely right in their criticisms of the system.
Yeah.
But then again, I mean, in a place where you're also fighting against the bargain bin,
it's right. It's an understandable move to try to make, but it's just obviously none of the things in the U.S. get off the ground because of the problem of the crash. Nothing's ever very successful. But, you know, we do have the Nintendo example. We do have the example of the successful Famicom Disk System, which was still kicked to the curb because the third parties were like, this is awful. We can't make the money we need to sustain our game development off of this. It's much better for us to sell a more expensive cartridge than it is to sell a cheap disc game.
Definitely. Well, you also run into the problem of any disc-based system, you can no longer upgrade the hardware.
Yes.
And when you're dealing with the Famicom in 1986, you need something else to help that system along.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that wraps up CVS for us.
CES, not
CES. Yes, I was looking at the next headline and mixing my letters together because our next headline is Palmtex launches PVS.
After first announcing their handheld cartridge-based console, the PVS, at the January 1983 CES, Palmtex has announced that the device has gone on sale in the US for $49, and that new games, in addition to the 3 launch titles, should appear at a rate of 2 per month. The system may not actually have hit stores in January, though, and would later resurface after Palmtex changed its name and the device was renamed as well. Only 3 games would ever be made. So we talked about this one last year. This is this weird 500 or so pixel screen with these overlay type things and colored pixels turning on and off. It's not a thing. It doesn't take off. They go into bankruptcy after they change the name a couple of times, and a few of them get out or end up with discounters or whatnot. And there's some video of it online, but this is dead as a doornail.
Yep. Well, Carl, it is time for us to see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
Well, it won't be, but it's not because of the Mac. So, Apple aired an ad on TV presuming the Macintosh was going to change the world and prevent us all from being slaves to the man during a football game between beer commercials. I guess this is a story. Why is this here?
Well, it's not just any old football game, Carl. It is the Super Bowl, which in the United States of America is a pretty big deal. And it wasn't just any old commercial, but a commercial directed by cinema's own Sir Ridley Scott. Not that he was a sir back then, but yeah. I mean, it was a big deal because it was a very bold and widely seen ad. It only ever aired that once on television as a commercial. I think it aired twice during. I think it aired twice during the Super Bowl, but they didn't play it anymore after that. But it aired on newscasts across the country for a bunch of free advertising. I'm pretty sure it never aired again. I'm pretty sure it was just the Super Bowl.
I could have. Well, yeah. I'd have to look it up again because I think that wasn't that just. It was intended to only air that once, but then they ended up airing it anyway?
Well, no. It's the story was that the board got cold feet and they weren't going to air it at all. Like, they almost pulled it out of the Super Bowl.
Okay. Well, according to the Wikipedia page, in the U.S., it first aired in 10 local outlets, including Twin Falls, Idaho, and they were basically, the ad agency was test running it.
Okay, yeah, but that's tests. I think after the Super Bowl it never aired again. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, and the only U.S. national airing was on January 22nd.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Because market tests, just like coin-op market tests, don't count. You know. You did it technically air, yes, but. All those shows, Broadway shows, before they actually officially open it. Yeah, exactly. It's a test run, yes, but of course it was replayed over and over and over again. So it was an incredibly effective piece of advertising. Then they did the Lemmings commercial, and that was a less effective piece of advertising. But they went big, so that makes it a big story. I mean, did it move Max? No. At the end of the day, it did not, but it was a major topic of conversation after it aired, so that counts for something.
Oh, that's definitely true. And, it's 1984. There's, like I said, there's a lot of talk about it at the time because, well, it was 1984. So, yeah. And I guess it also established Apple. It gave Apple a different image at this point. Mm-hmm. Apple hadn't been seen. I don't think they were really seen as the super sophisticated machine at this point.
No.
I mean, they were the machine that you played games on in schools.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, okay, they've upgraded their image. Now, if they could just make a system that could play a decent game. No, just kidding.
And speaking of systems that can't play a decent game, Sinclair introduces the QL.
Move over +4. Sinclair has the low-budget office computer thing figured out with the Sinclair QL. A Motorola 68008 CPU, 128K of RAM, and 300 kilobytes of machine-coded productivity software bundled with the machine, including a spreadsheet, a database, a word processor, and a business graphics package, each on their own micro drive cassette. Oh yeah, the QL has not one, but 2 micro drives as standard, but it's only 399 pounds. So that's good, right? Initial mail order only sales will begin by the end of February, with mass retail in the autumn, and a US launch, again by mail order by Sinclair, will also happen in the autumn at a price of $499.
I mean, it was the logical next step. This was the new hotness in cheap computers, was these all-in-one productivity computers. And add on top of that Sir Clive was never completely happy that he was mostly remembered for a game machine. And this felt like a bit more of a serious product. But yeah, of course, it turns out you can only have a cheap all-in-one computer by cheaping out on the drives. And so we have a repeat of the Atom disaster with a different variant of, hey, we can make a cassette disc that is just as great as magnetic disc media. Spoiler alert, you cannot.
Not only that, he also cheaped out on the chip. Because it's not a 68,000, it's a 68,008. Now, I had to actually look this up. I had never heard of the 68,008 before. So, if you're familiar with the 68,000 architecture, it's internally 32-bit, but to the outside world, it's 16-bit. I'm simplifying a little bit.
Yeah.
So, there's a little bit of a bottleneck getting out of the chip. So if you code it just right, you can take advantage of those 32-bit processes inside and then, just grab your details out, but you really have to code for the chip then. The 68,008 was a cost-reduced version that reduces that 16-bit output to 8-bit. The advantage of this is it makes the chip cheaper to make, but it also makes the chip compatible with all those 8-bit designed RAM chips that are out on the market. So he's not only going cheap on the media, he's going cheap on the RAM, and he's gone cheap on the chip, which means that if you are not coding specifically for this chip, you are not going to get any decent speed out of this thing. And there's an interesting article in one of the UK weeklies where they're talking to a manager at one of these big bookstores. And he was like, yeah, they announced the QL and every single book we had on programming the 68,000 chip. And he said, these are very expensive books because they're all imports from the US. They all sold out immediately, and people, I'm like, why are you buying this? This is not a 68,000 chip.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is going to be a shit show, is a nice way of putting it.
Carl, I think Sinclair could be in a lot of trouble if they end up with a competitor that actually knows how to do really cheap electronics really well. And on a completely unrelated note, Amstrad announces home computer.
UK discount electronics maker extraordinaire Amstrad has announced that they will be entering the home computer market. In typical Amstrad style, the machine will be an all-in-one unit with a built-in tape deck and, according to early reports, a built-in color monitor. At its heart, it will have a Z80, or I should say Z80 processor, 64K of RAM, and graphics comparable to those of the BBC Micro. The machines are already being manufactured in Japan and will be sold through high street stores and discount electronics shops.
Yes. Lord Sugar is in some ways the person Sir Clive wishes he could be. Not in every way, because, Sir Clive really did want to change the world. And Amstrad Lord Sugar just wanted to make a quick buck. But the important distinction here is he knew how to make a quick buck with a product that the public actually enjoyed. He made a fortune in stereo systems, low-end stereo systems, and now he is turning that attention to this home computer market in the United Kingdom.
Exactly. And I mean, the Amstrad's going to have some very, very seriously cool features. The graphics chip on it does tremendously vivid, beautiful colors. The downside is it's using a Z80.
Right.
If it was using anything but a Z80, a lot of programmers would actually be coding specifically for it as opposed to just doing really, really lazy ports from the ZX Spectrum, which is going to mar a huge chunk of the Amstrad library for its entire lifespan, unfortunately. But, it's going to be an all-in-one unit. It's got the tape deck right there. It's quick and easy. The French are going to love it. Anything with a lot of color is going to work well. It's going to get a fairly popular release in Germany, and in Spain it's also going to be a major player until, of course, we'll get to Lord Sugar buying up the ZX Spectrum a little bit later.
Indeed. Right now, though, we will turn to a completely different kind of story as Inmos promotes their Transputer.
Chip maker Inmos Corporation has announced a new 32-bit version of their Transputer chips. The Transputer concept foresees the linking of many low-cost chips that each have built-in networking hardware and memory to create easily linked scalable multiprocessor systems. It's an interesting concept. I had to look it up. I mean, they've been around for a few years at this point, and now their 32-bit architecture. Had you been able to actually get software for the system, it probably would have been really, really cool. But it's such a departure from what everybody else is doing at this point that it's not going to work. I mean, they were selling some of their transputers for like $4 a pop. Which, this was the thing. They had them down to such a low price, and the idea of the scalability, would have been interesting, but you would have needed completely different types of operating systems to run it. It's what we've talked about here on the show before with what the Eastern Europeans ended up having to do with their multi-Z80 systems where they're, networking it and writing specific code for each computer just to get some more power out of their systems. They would have been able to do something with this, but there's no reason to do this in the West at this point in time with the ever increasing speed of the individual chips from companies like Motorola and Intel.
All right. Well, moving on to computer software, Sierra teases third generation adventure game.
Move over text, move over still images. Sierra has teased that their yet untitled new game will involve animation, simulated 3D, and sound, and be for the IBM PC. I'm guessing that they're talking about Learn with Leaper? No.
Yeah, that must be it.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, they're hard at work on King's Quest, and, this third generation thing that they're talking about is, of course, the addition of full animation as opposed to just graphics. And it delivers on that front. It's a Sierra adventure game, which means it has a lot of arbitrary deaths and all sorts of illogical puzzles and all of this. But
didn't you hear Roberta 2 months ago tell us that all of her puzzles made perfect sense and that you could just solve them with logical thinking?
Yeah.
Just saying.
Logical.
Yeah. But this is the revolution. This is going to be the paradigm shift. This is what LucasArts is going to build off of and so many other companies. And it's all kind of funny because it's happening at the same time that Infocom is still running its ad campaign saying you don't need graphics for an adventure game. Your brain will do everything for you.
Yeah. No, this is the wave of the future, for sure.
Yeah. And just like so many other companies, Sierra has also announced a bunch of ports of existing titles for the IBM PC. And this is really this wave of the PC booter games, which in many ways are designed specifically for the PC Junior because the PC Junior has so little RAM that you need to boot directly from the disk in order to bypass the operating system. Otherwise, you'll never be able to run anything. And so we're getting Oil's Well, Ultima 2 is coming. So there's just this wave of software that's coming for a machine that's really supposed to be a workhorse.
And Ken Williams was really ahead of the curve on this because he really wanted that IBM relationship. He felt that way, as I'm sure you discussed with him, about a lot of big companies. He cultivated that Disney relationship earlier on because he felt it was just good business to be in business with some of the biggest companies in the field. And as soon as IBM was entering that PC space, he latched onto them, and it didn't pay off right away. They did Adventures in Serenia for the PC launch, and that was whatever. And then King's Quest, on the PC Junior, because the PC Junior flopped, that's a whatever. But by establishing that relationship, he was ready when the Tandy 1000 came along. And suddenly it was cool to be in the PC game business. And he was one of the only big companies that had wholeheartedly embraced that business. And so he was ready.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and when I talked to him, basically it sounded, he said, didn't really have many choices at this point. The development of King's Quest is co-financed by IBM, because they desperately need something to show off the system. And he's lost his shirt at this point on VIC-20 and other cartridge software. He doesn't really have a choice. This is the only thing he's got going. And porting existing designs over to the PC is cheaper than developing new stuff. I need to check again when the big layoff happened. When they axe everybody at Sierra, when Al Lowe gets the boot and stuff. That's got to be around this period of time, but I'm not quite sure when that happens anymore.
Right.
I have to look it up again, but yeah, that's got to be around here when so many of these guys become free agents.
No, it is. It is right around here because this is when the company's falling apart. I just don't know exactly, what month it happened off the top of my head. So
yeah. Oh well.
But meanwhile, in other computer game news, Warner buys into First Star.
Warner Software, a recently created software division of Warner Communications, has bought a non-controlling stake in First Star Software. This is likely a first step to get the new division into the software business without having to set up its own development arm, and will help First Star with marketing and distribution, as well as giving them access to some very nice licenses.
Yeah, so it's interesting that paradoxically at the same time they're trying to wash their hands of Atari, they're actually expanding their presence in games in other ways. But of course, that's because they really hadn't soured on the long-term profitability of games. They just saw that Atari market collapsing. So even as they need to get rid of Atari because of this Murdoch situation, they don't want to exit entirely. They've created Warner Software. They see the home computer business as a potential avenue for expansion, and they want to be involved in that. And so buying into First Star gives them that. And of course, on the First Star side, the founder of First Star was a movie guy by first inclination, not a game guy. So having the opportunity to get involved with one of the big names in movies had to have been something of a thrill.
Oh, definitely. And also remember, First Star has a relationship with Atari because it started by the guy who wins the first Star.
Their first game was from the guy who won the thing. It wasn't founded by.
Well, no, but they have that relationship. I mean, the name is related to Atari, and this is also how First Star is going to get Warner-owned licenses like Spy vs. Spy, which we talked about extensively in our last live meetup. Right. For the patrons, wink, wink.
Yep, as well as Super. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I don't mean to step over you while you're promoting us. That's important. But yes, and also Superman.
Superman is going to be another one that's going to come out of that. And there's a few more that will pop up over time. Not a lot. They announce a bunch, but not a lot of them come to fruition. So, yeah. Now, just on a side note, because it is kind of a big deal, they've also announced that they've got a new character called Rockford who's going to be showing up in a game called Boulder Dash for the Atari 8-bits and the C64, and later on for the PC Junior. Obviously, Boulder Dash, huge series, massively important, probably the greatest legacy of First Star Software, other than, of course, Spy vs. Spy, one of my personal favorites. So, that's coming down the pipeline.
Yep. And one of those few games that became briefly a fad, one of the few computer games to make the transition to coin-op.
Very true.
Which was very briefly a thing here in the mid-1980s.
Oh, come on. In the early 1990s, we almost got Lemmings the coin-op. So... And Tetris.
Yes.
We also got Tetris as a coin-op.
Yes, but that's slightly different.
Now, that started off as a computer game.
Well, yes, it did, but it became a worldwide phenomenon. You had to have it everywhere.
Well, that's true. That is true.
Anywho, on the other side of the spectrum of things that did not become worldwide phenomenons, developers eager for the PC Junior give Adam the cold shoulder.
The Computer Entertainer newsletter has conducted an informal poll of software developers, and while 90% of them are already working on games for the PC Junior, which hasn't even hit the market yet, only one company had any plans to release games for Coleco's beleaguered computer. Some who had considered it got cold feet due to the many problems with the machine and the fact that it only has 26K of memory free once the basic pack is loaded. The early negative reviews of the PC Junior's hardware haven't deterred developers, though.
It should have, though. It should have.
Well, I mean, I think part of it is also that they see that even if the PC Junior doesn't take off, you still have all those IBM PCs out there.
Well, yes, but it wasn't clear at this point that you would be able to exploit that, because nobody knows that the Tandy 1000 is coming yet, because the products being made for the PC Junior, like King's Quest, are being made specifically to exploit the better multimedia capabilities of a PC Junior compared to a regular PC. So yes, obviously with very minimal effort you can translate King's Quest into a regular PC game because they're mostly the same system, but it's not going to have the same impact if you're running that on CGA graphics. Like it did really take the Tandy 1000 coming out to make that transition viable, and at this point nobody knows that a mainline PC like that is going to appear.
That is true. And this is where I'd have to go back and look at those PC booters to see which percentage of those, which were ostensibly for the PC Junior, also included CGA versions of the programs on the same disk.
Mm-hmm.
Because, why include the CGA version if you're not planning on also selling it to the PC market?
Right. And I mean, it's the kind of thing where you might as well also market it to the PC market if you're making it, because it's easy to do. But I don't think a lot of those games were predicating their success on sales of product to normal PCs until the Tandy 1000 came along, and then that became, viable.
That's true. That is definitely true.
All right, but not everyone is going PC Junior, because MECC goes Commodore.
The Minnesota Educational Computing Consortium has signed a deal with Commodore Business Machine to port 100 of its programs to the C64.
You've died of dysentery on your Apple II, now you can die of dysentery on your Commodore 64.
And this time we have the color brown.
Yes. There's the marketing campaign right there. Boy, MECC needed you back then, Carl.
The weird thing is that's the one program they don't port. There is no port of Oregon Trail to the C64.
Yeah, that's funny. I didn't remember one, but I just kind of assumed that if they were porting onto their programs that would be one.
Yeah, no, they don't port that one.
Interesting.
But yeah, so this is a pretty big deal. Minnesota Educational Computing Consortium, we've talked about them in the past in the show, but they are a major force in educational software. They've been around at this point for 7-8 years at least making software, maybe even longer.
Yeah, it's close to 10 at this point. I could look it up, but
yeah,
70. At least 73. So it's
okay.
And maybe even a little longer. It early 70s. Is when it
so
came
they have a ton of software, a lot of stuff that's been already ported to the Apple II or written directly for the Apple II. And yeah, them bringing some of this to the C64 potentially opens up the possibility of the C64 becoming computers that you could sell into classrooms.
Absolutely. And I did just look, it was 73. So
73. Okay.
Just over a decade here at this point.
Yeah.
Also, would like to point out that this little tidbit came to us courtesy of Ahoy magazine. And in other news, Ahoy magazine premieres.
A new magazine dedicated to the C64, Ahoy, has premiered and has a very clever cover showing a C64 on top of a giant pile of peanuts with the title, "Can the 64 Crack the Peanut?" Ahoy would run until 1989.
I mean, they could certainly give some pointers to the Germans on cover design, that's for sure.
You think that, yeah. CPU magazine this month. No stories in it worth using, but the cover was a Christmas pyramid. So the typical German Christmas pyramid with candles.
Yep.
Sort of turns around.
We own a couple of those because, we lived in Germany.
I have one that I've decked out as in Donkey Kong colors.
Nice.
They have that. A couple of computers, including a C64, and a bunch of Masters of the Universe figures and vehicles. I don't know why, but that's the cover this month. CPU magazine, absolutely bananas.
All right, that does it for the computer history for the month. Now we turn briefly to networking as the baby bells are coming for you, modem users.
In a legislative gimme to the baby bells, a new law gives the baby bells, the recently created regional phone companies birthed from the breakup of the phone monopoly held by AT&T, the right to charge extra for quote-unquote data quality service. This apparently, in the interpretation of some phone providers, means charging extra if you are using your phone line with a modem. How will they know you are a modem user? Well, that's the fun part. They'll have to see what you are, quote unquote, saying while on the phone. Yeah, so what we're dealing with here is the aftermath of breaking up the phone company monopoly in the United States. For those outside the U.S. or even those who may be too young to remember this, there was one phone company for like 100 years, and they were then broken up because monopoly bad.
Well, I was just going to say, this is a truly bonkers monopoly compared to other monopolies like your U.S. Steels or your Standard Oil, because it's not just that they were the only company that could provide you phone service. They owned the entire phone network in the United States. You could not plug something into the phone network, into a phone jack in your house that was not approved by AT&T, that had their permission. So it was a completely, utterly dominant, insurmountable monopoly on the entirety of telephonic communication of all kinds in the United States.
Yes. And so they were broken up. Now you have regional monopolies on the lines, the Baby Bells. You have AT&T surviving as a long distance and data service provider, and chaos ensues for quite a while, still to a certain extent.
Well, a lot less today because AT&T has repurchased most of the Baby Bells. And while they do have competitors because other companies have built cell phone networks and that's where the hotness is anymore, we're almost back to having the original AT&T reformed, just not as powerful because the infrastructure is different today.
This is true. This is very true. But yeah, so the Baby Bells are hurting because they no longer have the long distance money that AT&T would collect, and they still have to provide free local service, or they're not allowed to charge by the minute for local service.
Right.
Which ultimately is going to be the reason why internet booms so much earlier in the United States and in other countries, because you can have that modem running all day long as long as the ISP is
let me
local.
tell you. Yep, because let me tell you, I mean, I lived in Germany in the late 90s, and, our service provider was, of course, Deutsche Telekom, and, we had some, we knew they were coming, but we had some pretty gnarly phone bills because local calls were also charged by the minute, and so when you were dialing in with your modem to go online, that was by the minute pricing.
Oh, yes. I remember it well. And I also remember being in the States in the end of the 90s and paying, I think, $15 for a second phone line, which I'm just going to say was never not occupied. Get right, baby. Wonderful program, that one. So, it was crazy, crazy times. And here, the question is, can they consider this basically a data service? And can they charge separately for the data service? This is a question that's going to, I believe, be fought over for quite a while, but it's interesting that what was Kilobot Magazine, now Microcomputing Magazine, has a really good write-up on this about the arguments for and against it, and it's just showing how new ways of communicating over existing infrastructure are going to necessitate different types of economies.
Absolutely. Moving on to the legal realm, which is rather crowded this month, we start with SCOTUS hears Betamax case.
A suit brought against Sony by Universal Pictures and the Walt Disney Company over videocassette-based copying of copyrighted works has made it to the U.S. Supreme Court. This case has also pulled in parties involved with audio cassette recorders and threatens to derail the burgeoning home recording equipment boom. So, yeah, this is the case. It's the Betamax case is what is being called in the magazines and newspapers of the time because Sony owns that format, and it's gotten all the way to the Supreme Court. As we've already mentioned, Betamax VHS is ongoing right now. Betamax is ultimately going to lose. But in regards to the law here, this is now the question of the so-called time-shifting argument. Which ultimately is just going to say, yeah, you're allowed to record because what you're really just doing is not pirating it. You are just time shifting. Instead of having to watch it in real time, you're just shifting when you're going to watch it. And that whole jumping over the ads, well, we're just going to ignore that. Most people don't jump over the ads with the fast forward button. That would make no sense.
I mean, we had, later in the 80s, we had 2 VCRs. And for stuff that we really wanted, I mean, we didn't do this with everything we recorded, but for stuff we really wanted to keep long term, my mom, because she was a stay-at-home mom, so she had the time, she would cut out the commercials by recording from the one VCR to the other VCR and, stopping the recording while the commercials are going, then restarting the recording. We only did that with a few things, not with everything. But yeah, when you have 2 VCRs, you can even get rid of the commercials.
Wow. Yeah. I never had 2 VCRs. I do, however, remember trying to record the video footage from my computer onto the VCR. Only problem was my computers were always from the States and I was in Argentina, and that VCR could actually play PALS, NTSC signals, had a switch on the back to switch it back and forth, but couldn't output them in PAL to the TV. So it was kind of pointless. But I tried, and it basically looked like Skinamax nonsense when I played it back.
Indeed. And in big video game court news, Nintendo beats Universal.
Universal's attempt to sue Nintendo over the alleged similarities between Nintendo's Donkey Kong and King Kong has been thrown out by a New York court via a summary judgment on the grounds that, quote, no reasonable jury could find likelihood of confusion, end quote, between the 2 characters.
And Universal did the smart thing and just stopped right there, right?
No, come on. Universal has decided to appeal the decision, despite Nintendo's assertion that the decision was based on Universal not having the copyright and not having gone after others who use the mark. So this is a little bit weird because some of the publications are quoting the New York judge's idea of the likelihood of confusion. Other ones are talking about what Nintendo, they're citing Nintendo as the source. Then Nintendo claims that it was because Universal didn't have the rights to begin with. I haven't looked at the actual decision to know which criteria or if both criteria were there, but it is interesting that Nintendo is not talking about the likelihood of confusion. They're like, no. The reason this failed is they don't even have the rights.
And they don't. King Kong is in the public domain due to a very complicated situation that evolved because it was a book. There was a book first, I believe it was. And the way the rights came to RKO, I used to know it better. I'm not going to look it all up now, but basically the rights at one point were not transferred properly, and back then that mattered for copyright before the copyright reforms in the 70s. And so it ended up in the public domain. But the thing that's really bad about this, and what gets the judge in the appeals court really, really unhappy with Universal, is that when they did the remake with Dino De Laurentiis, they had to prove to get that movie made that King Kong was in the public domain, because if it was still copyrighted, it would have been the property of RKO and the successors of RKO. And so Universal actually successfully argued in the 70s that King Kong was in the public domain so that they could do their De Laurentiis remake. And then to turn back around when they knew it was in the public domain, and try to pass it off as something that they had rights to. That made the courts very, very cross when they figured that out.
And I'm guessing Nintendo has figured that out. I cannot imagine that Howard Lincoln would not have figured that out.
No, they did. So, it's a kind of fun story because they didn't know this at first. This was not a high-profile thing, and this is pre-internet. So they didn't realize that they had made these arguments, almost 10 years earlier. But Sid Sheinberg, the very overbearing head of Universal, put so much pressure on Nintendo to sign a settlement and sign an agreement and pay royalties immediately in their big meeting together, that it just set off Howard Lincoln's bullshit detector. And he was like, there is something really weird about this. Whatever you do, Arakawa, do not sign, and let's take some time to figure out what's going on here. And yes, and then he and it was probably actually Kirby and the actual litigators who probably actually discovered it rather than Lincoln himself, because then they did have litigators. John Kirby, whom the character of Kirby is named after, was the actual litigator. But yes, they did discover that Universal had argued that it was in the public domain. And fun fact, John Kirby did pass away a few years ago, but in recognition of the phenomenal job he did in this case by getting Universal shellacked, not just losing the case, but being forced to pay punitive damages, I believe, as well, because this was malicious use of the courts, was gifted a rather nice boat that he named Donkey Kong.
Very nice.
So yeah, no, it's a fascinating case just because of the way Universal was basically trying to bluff everybody into agreeing that they had rights that they knew they did not have.
Sorry, it's reminding me of a situation I had when I worked in the movie business, where somebody was basically tried to pull something similar with our company. Was really they wanted it done really, really fast, and I just sort of stood there, and I still remember one of the co-founders of the company was looking around the room like, well, should we do it? And I just very calmly came onto the call and was like, hi, well, I'd love to clear this up right now. By the way, since we're all on the line, there's this other issue with this movie that you guys just released that I think we might have the rights to. Sorry, I can't go into the details of the case. It was basically, we went from being pressured into giving up one of the most valuable movies of all time to a deal where we got paid quite well for that movie, and yeah, it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
That is hilarious, and yeah, this does sound very similar.
You need to know your background. You need to know what the hell is going on. Sorry.
You know what they say, Carl. That's showbiz.
Razzle dazzle.
Indeed. But speaking of Japanese companies and software copyright, software copyright debate heads to showdown in Japan.
Both an advisory organ of the Japanese Cultural Affairs Agency and the Ministry of International Trade and Industry have put forward competing proposals for granting computer programs copyright protection. Unlike most Western countries, Japan still recognizes no protection for computer software. The Cultural Affairs Agency wants to grant a 50-year copyright in line with existing international standards for artistic and literary works, while the MITI wants to create a new 15-year protection window, arguing that programs are not artistic and more in line with industrial creations. Both proposals are heading to the Japanese legislature, the Diet, but because only one proposal on a specific topic can be put forward in the Diet, a heated battle between these two proposals will have to be waged before the expected late May deadline.
Interesting. I was not aware of this particular fight.
Yeah, me neither. I mean, I understand where they're coming from, and it's really this idea of how are we going to regulate software and what value we want to give it. Because the 15 years sounds oddly like a patent.
Mm-hmm.
Or something patent adjacent.
Yes.
And by doing that, you would probably also have to open it up for designation. I don't have all the details of what the proposals were at this point, but given the fact that Japan, like we already talked about, is going to have to be going into these high-tech areas, is not yet a big creator or exporter of software and has absolutely no protection for software copying at this point, they may want less protection for this stuff so they have a more leeway for copying it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why the industry people are like, yeah, let's do this. The cultural people are like, no, this is a cultural good and we must protect it like any other art form.
No, that makes perfect sense, especially since MITI is, they're the arbiter of all international trade, as their name implies. Like, to do business in Japan, you have to get a license from MITI, and they usually put a lot of restrictions and qualifications and requirements on that kind of thing. So I think you're absolutely right as to what their motives are here.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So, but we'll see how this shapes out and how long it takes. Whether or not they're actually going to make it this year is something that we'll hopefully be able to follow and find out whether or not it's going to happen. I mean, the United States was ahead of the curve on this. We talked last year about how the UK had finally resolved these issues. And the European community has also been pushing forward with standardized regulations on software protection. So we'll find out when Japan joins the fray.
Indeed. In the meantime, though, that same old song and dance of former Atari employees sue.
In a twist on the usual script, former Atari employees are suing Atari instead of the other way around. A class action was filed by 2 employees on behalf of over 600 employees let go when Atari closed its manufacturing operations and moved them to Asia. The employees claimed they were assured their positions were safe when, according to the suit, Atari told the Labor Relations Board that plans to move manufacturing to Asia had started as early as 1981.
I mean, too bad, so sad. I'm not sure that obviously if the Labor Relations Board is involved, that implies some unionization. I don't know that Atari's factories were unionized. Maybe they were.
I don't think so.
I don't think they were. And, they're allowed to tell their employees whatever the hell they want.
This is where
they lied to you. Welcome to America in late stage capitalism, sucker.
This is what you get for refusing the glassworkers union. Could have solved the problem.
Yeah. Obviously it's always sad when people lose their jobs and when there are mass layoffs. I don't mean to make light of that. And it is a shame when corporations are not upfront about their plans. I really don't want to make too light on that. But from a legal perspective, it really is tough luck, bud.
Especially under the Reagan administration.
Right.
There is no sympathy at all at this point.
Exactly.
Mm.
And we end this section with an interesting crime story. A Computer Trade Association files stolen.
British industry organization, the CTA, spent 6 months compiling files on large-scale piracy operations in the UK. Someone has stolen 12 of those files, including some pirated tapes. The police are investigating the crime. So, yeah, this one was sort of a weird one. I just thought I'd include it because we've talked about piracy in the UK. We've talked about how the laws protecting software are relatively new. And this big operation is suddenly now derailed. And the official for the organization even says, yeah, we'll be able to recover some of this, but it's going to take another 6 months to gather everything again. And then everything is already outdated and pointless. So, Whoever stole these files, tipped off, who knows how organized is the piracy at this point.
Indeed. Very interesting.
Yeah.
We now end, as we always do, with a few miscellaneous stories, starting with the Great White North will teach Yanks about computers, eh?
Nice accent. Love it. Canadian TV import Bits and Bytes gets reviewed by the New York Times. This series from Ontario tries to teach viewers about how computers work and how to interact with them. So it's similar to the way the UK series, the computer program, works.
Right.
I put a link. It's a YouTube link to all the episodes. It's fun to look at. It's an interesting little sort of window into the past. But it's another sign that American television just has not figured out how to get this up and running.
No. Absolutely.
We have shows where kids are playing games for prizes, but that's about it.
Indeed. Meanwhile, Atari signs deal with Androbot.
Atari has announced that they will be licensing products from Atari founder Nolan Bushnell's Androbot, Inc. Atari also agreed to a joint marketing effort involving unspecified products.
I mean, robots are hot, y'all. I don't know exactly why. I assume Star Wars has a little something to do with it. But, you know, a lot of companies are investing in robot toys at this point, particularly in Japan.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
obviously, this doesn't go anywhere, but yeah.
Knight Rider is the biggest thing on television, and, you know, it's basically a robot car, so.
It is. Very true. Next, we have Learning with Leaper cover art sets Sierra standard.
Yeah, this one's sort of a personal one for me. So one of Sierra's first educational titles, Learning with Leaper, features a stylish paper cutout cover artwork, presumably by Mark Crow. This could be the first of his many paper cutout artworks, which would also adorn the early Leisure Suit Larry titles. And yeah, for me, this is the art style of Sierra covers. For me, when I think of Sierra covers, I'm always thinking of these, you know, 3-dimensional paper cutouts, Leisure Suit Larry 1, 2, and 3, as well as the later VGA remake of 1 has these. And as I found out from Al Lowe, those were all done by Mark Crow. When I asked him if he still had any of them, he said no. Unfortunately, they've all been destroyed. Nobody thought to keep these.
Aww.
And yeah, it's really a shame because they're absolutely gorgeous, and I feel that they just give the games a very different feel. So it's just one of these weird things. I thought this was the first one I noticed that had it, and thought I would mention it.
Very good. Next, in the world of cartoons, Barbera spills the beans on Pac-Man TV show.
Electronic Games Magazine has a fun interview with cartoon supremo Joseph Barbera about how the Pac-Man cartoon show came about. Barbera says that they had to distance themselves as much as possible from the games to avoid being hit by the FCC's rules about making cartoons that promote existing products. Thus, no sound effects from the game were used, and they needed to create a bunch of new characters like Baby Pac and Super Pac, as well as the new villain to keep the motivation going. He claims to try to stay on top of what is happening in video games because he needs to be ahead of the kids of today, who have so many options for entertainment and are so much more sophisticated than in the past that a simple chase cartoon won't cut it anymore.
Well, don't worry, because the Reagan administration's about to make all of that moot, so much so that just a few years later we will have Captain in the Game Master, which certainly doesn't try to hide any Nintendo graphics, sound effects, characters, etc.
Well, right on the cusp that most of the characters look nothing like their video game counterparts, but that's
yes.
entirely.
Yes.
But that's not because they couldn't do it, it's just because they didn't.
No, exactly. But yes, boy are the FCC rules about to get quite the change. on this front.
Yeah. Well, and that's what he also says. I mean, it took quite a while from first proposing it to actually getting the license to developing the thing. And he talks about how, games come and go so quickly that it's risky to do a property like Pac-Man. Pac-Man, he said, was unique because it was just so fundamental. It was such a big hit that you could do this show basically 2 years after the big Pac-Mania had already passed. But then most games would not be able to survive that because they just come and go too quickly.
Exactly. Case in point, by the time all of these video game cartoons like Pac-Man and the Supercade and all of that start premiering, the industry is already falling apart around them.
Exactly. And, it's one of the few that's going to survive is going to be Dragon's Lair, is going to do fairly well, but that's pretty much just because it stands on its own. I mean, you don't really need the game for that.
Exactly. And we end our look today with a little blurb that TSR gets new management.
Despite being the biggest fish in the role-playing pond, D&D maker TSR has made some missteps, and a new management team has been brought in. Not only have they reorganized the company into a publishing wing, an international wing, a licensing, and a TV production wing, but they have axed the company's video game division.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what this blurb is referring to. I looked at the blurb because they didn't bring in new management. They might have brought in some new middle managers, but the company was still being led by the same people. Now, they did split it into the 3 divisions. Brian Bloom became the head of TSR Ventures. Kevin Bloom was in charge of kind of the game business of TSR Inc., because TSR Hobbies is the parent company. And Gary Gygax took control of TSR Entertainment Corporation, whose job it was to shop around for licenses and movies and TV and all of that stuff. So, I mean, they did do that, but it's still the 2 Blooms and Gygax at the top, as it's been ever since TSR Hobbies was formed after the original company had to be disbanded upon the death of Gygax's co-founder, Dan Kay. So not exactly sure what they're referring to by new management, but it is definitely true that this is a period of time when the company is running into a bit of trouble. There had been a huge burst of interest in D&D after the publication of the AD&D books, and most notably after the whole Satanic Panic nonsense that went on. There was this real push of and growth in the hobby, but then it leveled off, and TSR tried to expand into other hobby areas, such as needlepoint, to pretty disastrous results. And so the company is hurting in this period, and they are reorganizing. But I'm not sure what they mean by new management, quite frankly.
Yeah, I don't know either who they were referring to. It might just be some new people on site. As far as I understood it, and I just looked into it briefly, we've talked several times already about how Gygax is over in Hollywood doing his Hollywood thing at this point, trying to get the movie off the ground. And he's been doing that for quite a while. Apparently, he's going to be coming back to the company to discover that it's become a shit show in '84, I think. And when he comes back is when basically he gets ousted shortly after that.
Yes, he does.
The corporate shenanigans there of what the Blooms have done with the company or don't do with the company is going to be a big issue. But yeah, I think it's going to be one of those situations where they're reorganizing going into computer software didn't work. Anybody who's listened to my conversation with Bruce Nesmith will know how well that worked out. And
no, they didn't understand the market.
They didn't understand the market. Plus, let's face it, they had already licensed out their most important property. They couldn't make a D&D game.
Right.
It's like, it's like we're going to start Lucasfilm games, but we don't have Star Wars or Indiana Jones. Oh, wait, we have really talented people. We're just going to let them do whatever they want and they don't have to make money off of it. Okay, that's a different ballgame. But yeah, I don't know exactly what the situation is here. This is one where really diving deeper into the history of TSR would probably be necessary. But
well, and I mean, there's a great book on that by John Peterson that talks entirely about the history of TSR in this period. And, they were having problems and the banks were getting mad at them and they were doing layoffs. And in, well before this, in June 1983, they reorganized into these 3 new companies, TSR Inc.
Four total. TSR Inc., TSR International, Ventures, and Entertainment.
Yeah, I mean, there's international, but I'm talking about kind of the 3 domestic So TSR Worldwide is the parent company for international subsidiaries and sales. I mean, that was going on as well. And then they had the 3 domestic companies, TSR Inc., TSR Entertainment, and TSR Ventures. Which are, and all 4 of these, I mean, you're right, it's 4. And all 4 of these companies were subsidiaries of TSR Hobbies. Corporate shenanigans, yay. But that happened back in June, of 83, so I don't know why we're seeing a deal made of this now.
Probably just because it's taken that long to sieve down to the video game magazines.
Yeah, I mean, Lake Geneva is not exactly a media hotspot, shall we say.
This is very, very true. And yeah, I mean, they're going to get an uptick in 84 because Dragonlance is going to happen. But it's all going to be crazy. But I thought it was a nice end cap to our very first story today, which was the birth of D&D. And here we see TSR going through some growing pains and whatnot.
Absolutely.
So, that's it. We're done.
That's it. We did it.
No more. So, Alex, what is the word of the episode?
Well, I think there's only one word that can truly encapsulate all of this, and that is albatross.
Good job. I'll take it. I'll take it.
Yes,
albatross. It is
albatross because an albatross is something that idiomatically weighs you down. Which is why the famous Jack Tramiel article at the start of the sequence of events that eventually led to his resignation was called Albatross, and we have so many companies with so many albatrosses. Coleco with its Atom, IBM with its PC Junior, Milton Bradley with its Vectrex. Lots of albatrosses around lots of necks, and so that is what we are going with today.
Totally get it. Totally get it. So, remind all the fine people listening to us where they can find your fine work.
As always, it is They Create Worlds. The podcast is at podcast.theycreateworlds.com. The book, They Create Worlds, Story of the People and Companies Who Shape the Video Game Industry, Volume 1, is available from major online retailers. And Carl, when is this coming out? When do you think you'll have this up?
Latest by the 10th.
Okay. And I have to tell you all that right now, They Create Worlds is part of one of the current Humble bundles. Very exciting. So my book is very expensive. I know this. But right now, just $25 given to the Humble Bundle will get you my book, as well as several other books related to game design and game history. So if the only reason you've been holding off on They Create Worlds is because of the price, which I totally understand, now is the time to strike. I think it goes through sometime like the 20th, sometime later in the month of March. There's still time. Head over to Humble Bundle if you want, and it is specifically the Game Architecture, World Building, and AI bundle from Taylor and Francis. CRC is another imprint of Taylor and Francis, so it's all the same company. And even though it says Architecture, World Building, and AI, there are 3 or 4 game history books in there as well, including mine. To get mine, you need to pledge at least $25, but there's a lot of stuff in there.
Or 23 euros and 12 cents.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So yeah, that's the big news in Alex Land from a where you can find me perspective. Humble Bundle.
Yes. And for everybody else, if you haven't already become a patron, $1 a month, are the 7 Minutes in Heaven Let's Play videos, as well as our now monthly hangouts. You'll be invited to that. We're trying to do them the last Friday of each month. Can we tell everybody it's going to be the 29th of March? Can we safely say that here on the record?
I think so. I think that should work.
Okay, the 29th of March will be the next one. We'll try to figure out a time that works sort of for everybody, so it's not too late, not too early, blah, 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 blah. And we'll be posting that as well as the links to it on the patron page. So, and we may actually have some special guests joining us from time to time. So we'll see who we can con into showing up for our thing without charging us anything.
And that is also a joint effort between Video Game Newsroom Time Machine and my other podcast, They Create Worlds. So patrons of either will be welcome.
That is true. Sorry. Did not mean that it's exclusive here.
No, I didn't take you to mean that at all. I just wanted to clarify for the listeners.
Excellent. So everybody, with that being said, we're done here for today. Have fun.